Welcome to Mystic Realms Recap. Links are in the description below. Please show some love of the author and me. On to the show.
Hearing that Lin Li wanted information about Mozari, Bradler and the few ministers next to him seemed to be hesitant. Although they were all aware how terrible this disaster was, they still found it a little difficult to accept the idea of letting someone read all the secret texts of the kingdom. At the thought of this, in a bid to test the waters, Bradler asked Lin Li, "President Flick, if you have enough power to cooperate, can you suppress the demon with your Mount Tai Mageth?" Lin Li's brows furrowed into a frown as soon as he heard that because they were clearly bargaining with him. What a joke! He was just asking to see the so-called secret texts for the sake of helping the Gilded Kingdom make it through this crisis. Yet, they were still ignorantly trying to bargain with him. In this case, forget it. I believe that you can definitely deal with that demon and get rid of him with your power. He's just an ancient demon deity, after all. The celebration ceremony should also be considered to have come to an end now, so we will take our leave. After saying that, Lin Li turned around and got ready to leave with Connorus. Besides, anyone could tell that Lin Li meant that he was leaving the Gilded Kingdom altogether, and not just the square alone. His words had frightened Bradler and the others. If they really let Lin Li leave, they would have one less trump card to use in dealing with Mozari, and the loss would require them to pay a huge price to make up for it. Although they still had the Illuminati to rely on, the demon might soon break free from the confinement of the seal. By the time the Illuminatus rescue team came to their aid, Four Seasons Island would probably have already sunk to the bottom of the sea. "Please wait a moment and let us discuss this for a while, President Flick." Bradler hurriedly called out to Lin Li to stop him. Four Seasons Island was the foundation of the Gilded Kingdom, and where their roots were. Even if the Gilded Kingdom was in control of a large territory, they still couldn't afford to lose Four Seasons Island. Seeing that Lin Li had stopped in his tracks, Bradler didn't dare to delay any longer, and instead turned around to look at the few ministers, with whom he discussed whether they should let Lin Li, an outsider, read the secret texts of the Gilded Kingdom. If Bradler and the others had a clear understanding of everything regarding Mozari, and where the records containing information about him were, this might not be an issue at all. However, even they themselves were unaware of that information, so they had no choice but to show Lin Li, an outsider, the secret texts regarding the Gilded Kingdom, in the early stage of its establishment. In that case, they would need to take some risks as there might be some information related to the fate of the Gilded Kingdom. The several ministers around Bradler were from the various senatorial families of the kingdom. Hence, Bradler still had to consult them and ask them for their opinions before they could decide whether to show Lin Li the classified texts. While Bradler and the others were discussing this matter, the battle going on in the middle of the square had reached a cool-down stage. Mozari was indeed worthy of being an ancient deity. Although he had already been significantly weakened, he was still far stronger than what those few giant divine soldiers could contend with. Amidst the various deafening explosive sounds, cobweb-like cracks began to appear on the bodies of those powerful giant divine soldiers. In fact, everyone could even see countless stone fragments of various sizes falling downwards continuously. Although Mozari was not coping with the siege of the giant divine soldiers with ease, there wasn't a single trace of injury on his body. He was continuously throwing punches and casting magic spells that blasted the giant divine soldiers that had rushed towards him far away. He was just like a lion that was teaching some insignificant jackals a lesson. Moreover, Mozari had somehow freed one of his feet that were initially still trapped in the crater, and stepped out at some point. When he stepped out with his other foot, he would probably have completely broken free from the seal. When they saw the situation, the several sanctuary powerhouses on the observatory platform finally stopped watching from the side without doing anything to help. Edmund and Elder Zoomer of the Illuminati, as well as the sanctuary powerhouses of the various forces, who had friendly relations with the Gilded Kingdom, all began attacking Mozari, who was in the center of the square. They also knew that the calamity a terrifying existence, like Mozari breaking free from the seal would definitely affect more than just the Gilded Kingdom. However, the attacks of the sanctuary powerhouses were not of much help, as they barely changed the situation. Even the attacks of Edmund, a peak sanctuary powerhouse, were still just like a tickle to Mozari, whose strength and realm were far higher than those of Edmund. Bradler and the several ministers were initially still undecided as they couldn't reach a consensus, but when they saw the situation in the square, they stopped arguing any further. As long as one wasn't a fool, they would be able to tell that it was almost certain that Mozari would break free from the seal. It was only a matter of moments before he did. "Okay, President Flick, as long as you forget it. The secret texts regarding the kingdom during the early stages of its establishment are stored in the secret vault of the royal palace. I'll take you there now," I hope we still have time, said Bradler. He'd initially planned to make Lin Li swear an oath or something. However, when he saw how critical the situation in the middle of the square was, he realized that he had to deal with it urgently instead of continuing to harp on this issue. Lin Li shook his head in amusement, thinking to himself that the people of the Gilded Kingdom were really oblivious to the severity of the current situation, because they were still being so anal about such an irrelevant detail at such a critical juncture. If Lin Li hadn't been good-tempered and kind enough to want to save the Gilded Kingdom from total destruction by Mozari, he would have long left this place instead of giving them time to discuss the matter. Rendered helpless by the situation, Bradler and the ministers of the various senatorial families had no choice but to agree to Lin Li's request to read their classified records. Compared to the danger that the kingdom was now in, the revelation of the Gilded Kingdom's secrets and idle chatter was considered a trivial issue that wouldn't result in any significant consequences. However, when he was preparing to lead Lin Li to the secret vault, Bradler glanced at the square worriedly and pleaded with Lin Li, President Felix, there is countless information in the secret vault, and I don't know how long it will take for you to find the information that you need, but as you can see, the situation here is urgent, and if anyone could tell that the several giant divine soldiers were simply too weak to stop Mozari from breaking free from the seal. If nothing unexpected happened, Mozari would definitely emerge from the seal, and when the time came, it would be difficult for them to handle the situation. Mozari had been sealed there for countless years, and once he broke free, he would certainly vent all his pent-up anger and frustration. In particular, the Gilded Kingdom could be considered Mozari's great enemy, so given the fact that he was sealed here, regardless by whom, there was a 99% chance that it had something to do with the Gilded Kingdom. Mozari was not a saint who would treat his enemy with kindness and grace, but a vengeful and vindictive great demon deity. So, how could he possibly let the Gilded Kingdom live well? Besides, Mozari would definitely have an urgent need to restore his power after breaking free. As long as he wasn't a fool, Mozari would know what to do to kill two birds with one stone by restoring his power while also exacting revenge on his enemy. Since Lin Li already had the intention to intervene and help, he naturally wouldn't want to see Mozari break free from the seal. Hence, he had actually come up with a plan long ago. Even if Bradler hadn't asked, he would have created trouble for Mozari so that he could buy some time to read the information. However, Lin Li did not whip out his staff and charge straight to the battlefield like the others. Instead, he stood on the observation deck and waved his hand in the direction of the center of the square in a seemingly inconspicuous manner. However, with a gentle wave of his hand, countless cobweb-like lines suddenly began to appear in the void in the battlefield in the center of the square. From afar, they looked like threads that were emitting rays of light. However, if one got closer, they would realize that the threads consisted of countless tiny magic runes. The countless threads emerged from the void and wound towards the center of Mozari's body. As soon as they touched Mozari's body, they vanished without a trace, but at the same time Mozari's massive magic flames gradually faded too, and the aura emanating from his body was obviously weakened by a huge margin. Seeing this scene, Bradler and the others were overjoyed. They hurriedly asked Lin Li, President Felix, can we suppress the demon again by doing this? At the end of the day, Bradler and the others were still hoping that they wouldn't have to let Lin Li read the secret texts, which they perceived as a last resort, as long as there was a slight possibility of an alternative option. When they saw how effortlessly Lin Li had managed to suppress Mozari's power, they immediately saw some hope. However, Lin Li glanced at the crowd coldly and said in a composed tone, this method can only be used once. I'm not interested in your clandestine records anyway, so if you think it's too difficult for you to let me read them, we can just forget it. Hearing Lin Li's words, Bradler and the others looked dismayed again as they were afraid that Lin Li would really stop caring about this matter and leave them in the lurch. Hence, the king hurriedly shook his head and waved his hands while saying, President Felix, you're mistaken, that's not what we mean. Let's hurry up and look at the information. Seeing how flustered and terrified Bradler and the others were, Lin Li no longer said anything and simply reached out to wave his hand in midair, creating a spatial rift, which he then stepped into. Bradler and the others no longer dared to waste any more time and quickly followed Lin Li into the spatial rift. When Lin Li and Bradler and the others came out of the spatial rift, they were already in the Gilded Kingdom's palace. Bradler sternly ordered the palace guards to stand down and quickly brought Lin Li to the secret vault in the depths of the palace. Soon, under the guidance of Bradler, Lin Li arrived in a heavily guarded secret vault in the deepest part of the palace. The secret vault was not built underground, but rather on the same level as the other buildings around. On the one hand, it would be easier to guard it, and on the other hand, it wouldn't arouse any suspicion. Bradler stepped forward and used some complicated techniques to open the door of the secret vault. He then led Lin Li into the secret vault, while the ministers from the senatorial families stayed outside, The secret vault, which was purely used for the storage of texts and reading materials, seemed more like a historical library. There were several rows of tall, neatly arranged bookshelves that rested on their weight on the ground in the secret vault. Apart from the secret records that Lin Li asked to read, there were also many books on magic, alchemy, and other fields of knowledge. Bradler's concern might also be partly in this regard, as he was worried that Lin Li, an outsider, would read the books that he regarded as treasures. They wouldn't know that Lin Li had collected magic books that contained information that was far more profound than theirs. How could he possibly covet their books? Lin Li did not even bother to look at the rows of magic books on the shelves, and instead followed Bradler all the way to the innermost part of the secret vault, where there was a large number of historical documents. In other words, they were the secret records of the Gilded Kingdom, which were different from those of the Illuminati, which were only recorded in one book. Otherwise, Bradler could have just taken out the book and shown it to Lin Li. President Flick, all information about the history of the Gilded Kingdom, down to the most minute detail, can be found in the records here. Where do you plan to start reading? Bradler seemed somewhat anxious, mainly because he was worried about the time Lin Li would take to read them, because he knew that finding the required information was not something that could be done in minutes. Of course, the other thing he was worried about was that the more Lin Li read, the more secrets of the Gilded Kingdom, some of which were rather embarrassing, he would find out. However, Lin Li wasn't actually interested in those things at all. If it weren't for the sake of suppressing Mozari, he wouldn't have bothered to look at those private matters of the Gilded Kingdom. Although the ancestors of the Gilded Kingdom had brought a large number of civilians to the sea since the beginning of the Dark Age, they hadn't established the kingdom immediately, because they hadn't wanted to attract the attention of the major forces at sea. Instead, they'd chosen to wait until they had accumulated a certain amount of strength. When the Gilded Kingdom was formally established, it was already the middle of the Dark Age, and they were strong enough to survive in the presence of the High Elves and the Ocean Dynasty. However, even though the records started from the middle of the Dark Age, there were countless records related to the Gilded Kingdom, and finding information about Mozari in them was just like searching for a needle in a haystack. By the time Lin Li found the information needed, the situation in the square would probably have reached the point of becoming unmanageable. Hence, after hearing Bradler's question, Lin Li gave it some thought, and said, "Let's start by looking for that prophecy of the kingdom. Can you be sure of which era that prophecy was passed down from?" Although it was said to be a prophecy, it was more like a legend for Bradler and the others. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been so uncertain about the authenticity of the prophecy. If it was a legend, it wouldn't be that easy to find out the exact era that the prophecy came from. Otherwise, how could it be considered a legend? After thinking about it carefully, Bradler broke out in a cold sweat, and it covered his forehead. Hence, he finally raised his head and nonchalantly said, "We're not very sure which era this prophecy originated in, but as far as I know, this prophecy should have appeared after we overcame a huge crisis brought about by the Ocean Dynasty after the establishment of the kingdom. It should be when the Ocean Dynasty suddenly got destroyed and the Great Ocean War began." While Bradler was speaking, he paced back and forth in front of the bookshelves to search for a book before finally stopping at an area that was marked as belonging to a certain era. The time period was designated clearly by years. By comparison, using the chronology of the Ocean Dynasty, it should have been just before the start of the Great Ocean War. Lin Li walked towards Bradler and looked at the eras labeled on the shelf. He had already found out about the origin of the great demon deity, Mozari, as well as the estimated era during which the immortal king barged into the 99th level of the deep abyss to severely injure Mozari. Hence, he compared the information he had to the era stated on the bookshelves, only to discover that there seemed to be an overlap between the two. "Alright, let's start checking from here, then." Lin Li immediately waved his hand, and the information in the notes on the bookshelf immediately flew over. The pages of each notebook that flew towards him began flipping rapidly as if they were being blown by the wind. In a few seconds, the pages of a book were flipped through. If it were anyone else, they might not be able to see anything at all, but Lin Li had extraordinary mental strength that was far greater than that of the people around him. Hence, he basically didn't have to use his naked eye to read the information. Instead, he managed to rapidly flip through the pages by adding his mental strength. The books of notes flew towards Lin Li one after another, and were tossed to the side almost immediately afterwards. The entire process was almost seamless. Meanwhile, Bradler stood rooted to the ground like a fool, and watched Lin Li flip through the book in an incredible manner while feeling worried. He wondered, can he really find the information he needs in such a manner? All of a sudden, a book with information stopped in front of Lin Li, and the speed of flipping was clearly much slower than with the previous ones. Seeing this, Bradler immediately saw some hope, and he frantically stepped forth to carefully ask, "How is it going, President Flick? Have you found something useful?" However, Lin Li wasn't in the mood to answer Bradler's question, as he simply focused on reading the information in front of him. It was a record of the information regarding the war between the Gilded Kingdom and the Ocean Dynasty back then. At that time, although the Gilded Kingdom had already accumulated significant power and strength, they were still like children against giants in the face of the Ocean Dynasty, which had ruled the endless ocean for countless years. During that war, the fleet of Gilded Kingdom was simply fragile as the islands it occupied were destroyed one by one, while countless civilians were reduced to slaves of the sea clans. In the end, only 4 Seasons Island and a few surrounding islands were left within the territory of the Gilded Kingdom. They were even surrounded by 1,000,000 troops of the Ocean Dynasty that put them on the verge of annihilation. However, at that juncture, the powerful Ocean Dynasty suddenly underwent a huge change, which caused the royal family of the dynasty to lose their massive power that they relied on to rule the endless ocean almost overnight. According to the sea clans, the royal family of the Ocean Dynasty had fallen out of favor with the sea god, but based on the specific era of the incident according to the information, Lin Li thought of the great demon deity, Mozari. The time interval between the occurrence of the massive change in the Ocean Dynasty and the immortal king's powerful attack on Mozari did not seem to be that long. Hence, Lin Li thought it was reasonable to suspect that the massive change that caused the Ocean Dynasty to crumble might have something to do with the great demon deity, Mozari. With the massive change in the Ocean Dynasty, the overlord sea clans of the ocean eagerly divided the resources and wealth of the Ocean Dynasty among themselves, thus forgetting about the Gilded Kingdom and allowing the latter to escape a disaster. The subsequent Great Ocean War gave the Gilded Kingdom an opportunity to develop and recover. By the end of the war, the Gilded Kingdom's power had already grown to become on par with and no weaker than the rest of the sea clans. By this time, the 7 overlord sea clans stopped attacking the Gilded Kingdom due to their mutual restraint. Instead, they began trying to get closer to the Gilded Kingdom. However, it wasn't stated clearly in the records what exactly the power that saved the Gilded Kingdom was. Lin Li wasn't sure if the great demon deity Mozari was the one who did it, either. At that time, the great demon deity Mozari had just suffered a debilitating blow from the immortal king, and to put it bluntly, he could barely save himself. How could he possibly have been able to save the Gilded Kingdom? Besides, Mozari wasn't a saint of the Gilded Kingdom, and its survival had nothing to do with him. After Lin Li had read that information, the book was tossed to the side immediately, and soon several more came flying past Lin Li's eyes rapidly. More than 10 books later, a yellowed scroll made of animal hide finally stopped in front of Lin Li again. It wasn't an official historical record of the Gilded Kingdom, but the private notes written by a certain person. However, in those notes, Lin Li finally saw the prophecy that Bradler had been talking about. The kingdom will live on because of demons, but it will also be destroyed by demons. When will our suffering end? Will that mage from the faraway mainland be our savior? No, it hasn't ended yet. On this exact same day 1,000 years from now, the kingdom will once again face a great crisis. But, who else will there be to save us? The perpetuation of the existence of the kingdom due to the demons seemed to be the explanation for the Gilded Kingdom's survival after that crisis that left them on the verge of annihilation. However, why would the great demon deity Mozari help the Gilded Kingdom? That made Lin Li think of a possibility, a deal with the demons. One of the abyssal demons' favorite activities was to tempt others into trading their souls with them, which was a usual condition in exchange for other benefits. For example, Connorus, who was called a soul trader at first, often dealt in trades that involved the acquisition of the souls of others. In Anril, there were people trading with demons every single day, but at the same time, there would also be people having their souls taken away by demons. Most of the heretics who were sanctioned at the Brilliant Shrine's Court of Heresy were those who traded their souls with the demons. However, the Brilliant Shrine could only have jurisdiction over the Leaden Kingdom. In places like the Felon Kingdom, where no one gave a hoot about the Brilliant Shrine, the Court of Heresy would not be able to extend their authority to sanction the heretics. Through this information, Lin Li was already 80% certain that someone from the Gilded Kingdom had made a deal with the great demon deity Mozari. However, there was another thing that made Lin Li bewildered. Given Mozari's identity as a great demon deity, it didn't seem reasonable for him to engage in soul trade like ordinary demons do. Besides, if his guesses were valid, did the great demon deity Mozari contribute so much power to help the Gilded Kingdom deal with the powerful Ocean Dynasty merely for the sake of a soul? That was obviously not an equal trade-off for demons, so it seemed impossible that Mozari would allow himself to get the shorter end of the stick in this deal. Besides, the immortal king had struck Mozari with a severe blow at that time, so Mozari should have been urgently trying to recover his power. A mere soul would not help with his injury at all. Even if it was the soul of a sanctuary powerhouse, it probably wouldn't be worth Mozar's effort, and put in so much power for the sake of saving the Gilded Kingdom. In that case, the deal that someone from the Gilded Kingdom had made with Mozari was probably far more complicated than a simple soul trade. The price that the Gilded Kingdom had to pay might be smaller than the extermination of the entire kingdom, but it surely wouldn't be too far off. More importantly, demons would never engage in fair trade, and there would often be plenty of traps in the contracts so that the other party entering the contract would have to pay more than what they offered. Of course, the people of the Gilded Kingdom might also have been aware of such tricky hidden clauses, and merely had no other choice but to accept it, because they were facing a crisis that would destroy the kingdom. Since they had survived the crisis at that time, it was naturally time for the Gilded Kingdom and Mozari to settle the scores and fulfill the deal. At this juncture, the Gilded Kingdom received aid from a stronger external force that suppressed Mozari. Lin Li associated the external force with the immortal king as soon as it came to mind. Although Garesco also had the same power to seal Mozari, it wouldn't make sense chronologically. However, deep down, Lin Li had a strong feeling that there seemed to be some kind of connection between the immortal king and Garesco that he couldn't quite put a finger on. He felt so especially when he was greeted by Garesco, and not the immortal king, in the tower where countless gods were sealed, when he went to the cursed island again. Of course, Lin Li knew that it was not the time to consider the relationship between the immortal king and Garesco now, so he put aside those doubts for the time being, and continued to check the records of the Gilded Kingdom. Indeed, Lin Li soon found another account of a disaster in the ancient notes of the Gilded Kingdom. Soon after the destruction of the Ocean Dynasty, the Gilded Kingdom faced a horrifying plague, even though they had just started recovering. During that plague, a large number of citizens died, and the prosperous land became barren. Despite the strict control of the kingdom, they couldn't contain the spread of the plague. Furthermore, the author of the notes wrote a clue stating that all the people who died in the plague soon lost their souls. Following this clue, the Gilded Kingdom and the Illuminati paid a huge price to find the great demon deity Mozari. Of course, they did not know of Mozari's true identity at that time, and merely thought that he was an extremely terrifying abyssal demon. When the Gilded Kingdom and the Illuminati were at a loss for what to do with Mozari, a mage from Anril appeared. With the help of this mage from Anril, the Gilded Kingdom and the Illuminati cast their nets to seal the abyssal demon that caused the plague to break out in the kingdom under the center of Four Seasons Island. Afterwards, under the guidance of that mage, Hepper Square was built for the purpose of suppressing Mozari together with the giant divine soldiers, whose strength was at the sanctuary realm. Immediately afterwards, it was mentioned in the notes that the mage from Anril became friends with the founding Saint Aquilo of the Illuminati. In fact, the mage was more like Aquilo's mentor, as he gave him guidance in various fields of knowledge. Afterwards, in a few short years, the incident on the cursed island occurred, and the mage vanished. Since then, while Aquilo fell, there were some overlaps between that data and the records in the Illuminatus canon. At this point, Lin Li was basically certain that the mage from Anril should be the immortal king, who had sealed the ancient god of light under the cursed island. In the notes, the author mentioned that the mage from Anril once said to the people of the Gilded Kingdom and the Illuminati that the seal that suppressed the great demon deity, Mozari, was not a permanent solution that could get rid of this huge trouble for them once and for all. At the end of the notes, he even said that he hoped that a younger version of himself could appear here in time in the future. Those words made the people of the Gilded Kingdom and the Illuminati rather confused. In fact, the vast majority of people even thought that they had misheard something. The author of the notes had written down that strange statement together with the prophecy about the current disaster faced by the Gilded Kingdom. It wasn't Lin Li's first time seeing those strange words, because he had seen a similar statement regarding the return of another version of himself left behind by the immortal king in the legends of the Cursed Island. However, Lin Li really didn't think that the other version of the immortal king was referring to himself, because he was just an outsider who had transmigrated from another world. Instead of believing that he was the other version of the immortal king, Lin Li was more inclined towards the possibility that the immortal king was referring to Garesco. After all, they were both from Anril, and similarly possessed incredible talent and achievements that ordinary people could not easily have. Afterwards, Lin Li took a look at the back of the notes to see that the author had deliberately left clues to his descendants regarding this prophecy. He said that his descendants could look for a note that was left behind by the mage from the mainland once that disaster he had predicted struck the kingdom. He also suggested that the notes of the mage from the mainland could contain a solution to help the kingdom survive the disaster, something left behind by the immortal king. Regardless of whether it could be used to deal with Mozari or not, Lin Li was extremely attracted to it. Hence, after putting aside the notes, Lin Li immediately searched for the thing left behind by the immortal king in the vast sea of information among the records. Fortunately, Lin Li had a significant understanding of the Immortal King's aura, which allowed him to quickly find a thin book with notes bearing the aura of the Immortal King soon after he searched with his mental strength. The book contained only over 10 pages of notes, written on the hide of some kind of marine magical beast. The densely packed words were written in Titan print and covered almost every inch of each page. However, they shared one common characteristic: they were all information about a certain divine smith level mageth. Lin Li had done quite a fair amount of research on divine smith level magic. Although he hadn't really reached the realm of the divine smith yet, it was actually still within his reach. Hence, Lin Li didn't have a hard time trying to read the Immortal King's notes. Besides, he also got the answers to many of the questions that he came up with in the past. While Lin Li was carefully reading the notes, Bradler paced back and forth anxiously at the side. From time to time, he would turn his head to look at Lin Li, hesitant to speak. He didn't know to what extent things had developed outside, but Lin Li didn't seem to have made much progress either. It was an arduous and tortuous night for Bradler. Some time later, Bradler had already lost count of how many rounds he had walked. When he turned around this time, he finally saw Lin Li looking away from a thin book with notes. Taking this opportunity, he hurriedly walked up and anxiously asked President Flick, "How is it? Are there any clues?" Lin Li took a deep breath and exhaled as he closed the notebook in his hand before saying to Bradler, "All right, Your Majesty. I've already thought of a way to deal with that demon, but my strength and efforts alone are far from sufficient. When we go there later, everyone has to abide by my arrangements and buy enough time for me. Otherwise, you may find someone else to help you." "No problem, President Flick. Please rest assured that I'll do my best to convince the Illuminati and the other forces to obey your instructions. I believe that they won't refuse. After all, once this demon breaks free from the seal, it will not be beneficial to any of them," Bradler said, nodding profusely as he quickly agreed to Lin Li's request. "All right, let's head there now then." After saying that, Lin Li put away the Immortal King's notes and brought Bradler outside, where others waited. At the same time, he once again reached his hand out to open a spatial rift in the air. Through Lin Li's spatial rift, the group returned to the observatory deck in the upper square. At this moment, the battle in the square had also reached an intense climax, where two of the Gilded Kingdom's giant divine soldiers had already fallen on the ground, while the sanctuary powerhouses who were surrounding the great demon deity, Mozari, all seemed extremely disheveled and wretched. Although Lin Li and the others had only been away for a short while, Mozara's strength and dominance had already risen again by a significant margin. When Lin Li left, he temporarily suppressed Mozara's power using a mageth, but now the mageth had clearly lost its effect. At this moment, Mozara's feet were already on top of the crater, and there were only some vague and faint mana chains coiled around his thick and strong legs. However, in almost every blink of an eye, a few of the mana chains would break, and it was basically impossible to drag Mozari back again. Seeing the situation in the square, Bradler did not dare to delay for a single moment, as he hurriedly yelled at the crowd, "President Flick has found a solution to deal with this. Everyone, please listen to President Flick's arrangements from now onwards. Only then can we seal this demon again." If it had been in the past, everyone would have definitely thought that Bradler was insane for saying those words. However, prior to this, the Octopus clan had managed to easily suppress Wild Whale, Robbie using the Mount Tai Mageth. Since then, Lin Li, the guru of inscription, became a household name in the Endless Ocean. Before Bradler even said anything, everyone had already seen Lin Li as the key to making it through this crisis. Besides, the people from the Gilded Kingdom would naturally adhere to Bradler's orders and follow Lin Li's arrangements, not to mention the Illuminati. Even the two overlord clans, the Siren clan and the Octopus clan, had absolute trust in Lin Li, which seemed unfathomable to the others. The four major forces were all willing to follow Lin Li's arrangements, so the other forces naturally didn't have anything else to say. Lin Li didn't stand on ceremony either, as he immediately took charge and gave everyone instructions loudly. The remaining giant divine soldiers of the Gilded Kingdom were still the main force that was besieging Mozari, but under Lin Li's arrangement, a few sanctuary powerhouses switched roles and started providing support to aid the giant divine soldiers in resisting Mozara's counterattacks. Although the giant divine soldiers' attacks were extremely powerful, their defensive abilities were clearly too weak compared to sanctuary masters. That was also the reason that two of the giant divine soldiers had been destroyed by Mozari within such a short period of time. If they continued going toe-to-toe against Mozari mindlessly, the giant divine soldiers would probably all be wiped out in the next moment. Hegel, the great monarch of the Octopus clan, began focusing on using an auxiliary Magath under Lin Li's instructions. His 8 magic arms swayed and swung in the void to create a complicated Magath out of thin air. At the same time, each and every person began to be shrouded in light. Under Lin Li's arrangement, the entire battlefield immediately became much more orderly than before, and unlike previously, they were no longer heavily suppressed by Mozari. In fact, prior to this, they had thought about cooperating with each other, but they were all figures of remarkable identities and status. None of them was willing to submit and take orders from anyone, so it wasn't easy for them to cooperate. Seeing that the situation had been stabilized for the time being, Lin Li didn't tarry any longer and raised the Helios scepter in his hand. Using it as an inscription pen, he began to draw several patterns formed with mana in the air. The gemstone at the top of the Helios scepter was shining as brightly as ever, as if it were the tip of a crystal inscription pen. As the gemstone swung through the sky, it left several rays of light in the sky like the latter was paper. The light did not weaken in the slightest, and with the appearance of each ray of light, a tremor would occur in space, and a powerful mana fluctuation would gradually be emitted by the light. Seemingly sensing Lin Li's threat, the great demon deity, Mozari, suddenly roared into the sky, while a sea of magic flames surged beside him. They were magic flames of destruction that would turn everything in the world into ashes. Perhaps even the sun, moon, and stars could never withstand the burning of the magic flames. One of the giant divine soldiers didn't retreat in time, and was struck by the magic flames that emerged, after which its rock-like body immediately caught on fire. The black flames quickly spread up and down the giant divine soldier's body, and in the blink of an eye, they engulfed the giant divine soldier that was more than 100 meters tall. Immediately afterwards, the giant humanoid torch collapsed, turning into black ashes that scattered all over the ground. Fortunately, the sanctuary powerhouses in the surroundings reacted much faster than the giant divine soldier, and Mozari had obviously recovered only a portion of his power. Hence, they managed to barely escape death. Elder Zoomer waved his staff, and a huge wave gushed out of the void before surging towards Mozari. However, as soon as the wave touched the sea of magic flames, it was lit like oil. Besides, the magic flames seemed to be urging upwards and towards Elder Zoomer. At this moment, a Magath emerged from the void in a flash, intercepting the front of the magic flame, and severing the connection between the giant wave and Elder Zoomer. Elder Zoomer hurriedly took the opportunity to fly backwards. Even though he didn't divide his attention to take a look, he knew that Hegel's Magath had saved his life. Immediately afterwards, a figure taller than the body of the great demon deity Mozari appeared in the void in an instant. It had 4 faces and 8 arms, and it was the statue of chaos that Saint Edmund had summoned. The 8 arms were either casting magic spells or wielding weapons to bombard Mozari in a frenzy. Prince Cleve of the Siren clan was standing in the periphery of the battlefield and slowly drew his longbow, after which he placed 7 arrows that were condensed, using combat energy on the bow. While Saint Edmund's statue of chaos appeared, Prince Cleve took the opportunity to pull the bowstring, and the 7 arrows shot at various fatal spots on the demon's body. Although the sanctuary powerhouses of other forces were forced into retreat by the magic flames, they soon started surrounding Mozari to besiege him again. Fortunately, the sea of magic flames was still bound by the seal. Otherwise, if Mozari were to unfold the boundless magic flames, the sanctuary powerhouses wouldn't be able to get close at all, let alone launch any effective attack. Seeing that the battle in the square was getting more and more dangerous, Bradler and others were so nervous that their hearts were about to jump out of their chests. However, no matter how anxious they were, none of them dared to ask Lin Li a single question. Even though they didn't know much about Magaths, they knew that they couldn't disturb Lin Li. When they saw the large and complicated Magath hovering in the air in front of Lin Li, the great demon deity Mozari suddenly let out a ground-breaking roar. At the same time, he stomped on the crater violently, causing many of the magical chains that were originally wrapped around his legs to be broken. As more than half of the seal was broken, the magic flames on Mozari's body became even more intense as they started raging, while sanguine thunderbolts continuously descended from the sky. At this moment, be it the giant divine soldiers or the sanctuary powerhouses of the various forces, they could barely retaliate. All they could do was to fight with all their might to resist the attack of the magic flame and sanguine thunderbolts. On the other hand, when Bradler and the others saw the new development, they couldn't help but feel hopeless. They could completely imagine how effortless it would be for Mozari to destroy the Gilded Kingdom with his terrifying power once he broke free. At this moment, Lin Li suddenly stopped, while the huge Magath in front of him began to slowly rotate like a millstone. At the same time, each magic symbol of each Magath began shining brightly. The light almost enveloped everything around them, as if a sun was rising right in front of them. Immediately afterwards, Lin Li pointed the Helios scepter that he was holding at the great demon deity Mozari, and the gigantic rotating Magath immediately charged towards Mozari oppressively. The diameter of the Magath that Lin Li drew out of thin air continued to increase from a few meters to several hundred meters while closing in on the great demon deity Mozari. When the Magath was nearing Mozari, the latter's massive body seemed rather small in comparison. The massive Magath rotated slowly in the air, continuously emitting sacred rays of golden light, as if a sun had landed in the center of the square. Along with the force of washing away all the evil in the world, the endless golden light seemed to have painted the entire square golden. The sanctuary powerhouses who were fighting against Mozari instantly felt like their bodies were full of power after being shrouded in the golden light, while mana surged in their bodies like a flood. Under the golden light, their bodies began to recover rapidly, and they were restored to peak condition in the blink of an eye. However, the endless golden light didn't feel that wonderful for the great demon deity, Mozari. Under that golden light, the dark clouds in the sky seemed to melt like ice and fire, while the sanguine thunderbolts in the sky vanished without a trace. On the ground, the sea of magic flames around Mozari had also converged into a mass due to the boundless golden light. As clear smoke rose rapidly, it became weaker and weaker. The magic flames that were burning on Mozari's body were also forced back into his body, revealing his cracked skin. Afterwards, wisps of clear smoke rose while his body was shrouded in the golden light, resembling a fire that was extinguished by water. After finally getting the chance to break free from the seal, Mozari naturally wasn't willing to be suppressed again. Hence, when facing the terrifying Magath that was approaching slowly, he stopped paying attention to those around him, and instead gathered all the power in his body, and swung his fists forward abruptly. Mozari's fists contained most of the power in his body, and they resembled two erupting volcanoes. The moment he struck with his fists, the entire space began to shake violently. It was as if his fists had penetrated countless layers of void. The terrifyingly enormous force even blasted a few of the sanctuary powerhouses in the surroundings away. Those several sanctuary powerhouses were tumbling and rolling in midair. After finally stabilizing their bodies through painstaking efforts, they couldn't help but seem horrified. Mozari's power had yet to even blast at them directly, but they already found it unbearable. If they were to be struck by his fists, they would probably be blown apart like a watermelon even if they had sanctuary-level power. At this moment, the power of Mozari's fists had already collided with the approaching Magath. The Magath that was initially still spinning slowly suddenly sped up again, and the golden light began to overlap like waves on the sea before blasting towards Mozari. As soon as the two forces came into contact, the Magath, which was like a new sun, clearly came to a halt, while the golden light resembled ripples in water due to the bombardment. However, a moment later, an even more dazzling ray of golden light emerged from the Magath, which was bright enough to even cover the sun. The raging golden light devoured Mozari's massive body, in the blink of an eye, as if a huge wave had been set off in the storm. Dumbfounded, everyone stopped in their tracks, and watched the changes in the center of the square, as well as Mozari, who was now engulfed by the endless golden light, resembling a golden mountain. He was completely different from his original form, as his body seemed to have melted while being wrapped in the golden light. All that remained was various roars that continuously came from within. However, everyone could tell from Mozari's roaring that he hadn't given up yet. At the same time, a huge Magath also emerged underneath Mozari's feet and emitted a similar golden light as the Magath in the sky. Afterwards, the massive Magath also finally rotated and descended to the top of Mozari's head like a large golden millstone that crushed Mozari's head with crackling sounds, while he was wrapped in golden light. Being crushed by this Magath, Mozari almost couldn't resist any longer, and he couldn't roar at all towards the end. After some time, the golden light in the square faded away unknowingly, and the huge Magath in mid-air gradually became thinner. Mozari's body, which had been shrouded in golden light, once again reappeared, but it no longer contained a trace of vitality. Instead, it was fixed in place like a statue. Hasn't it been sealed again? Bradler wondered as he stared at the center of the square, dumbfounded. All of a sudden, he couldn't figure it out. He'd initially thought that Lin Li had probably resealed the demon, but based on the lifeless body of Mozari, he clearly hadn't been resealed, but simply exterminated. Of course, deep down, Bradler wouldn't want to leave such a huge scourge behind on Four Seasons Island. God knew when Mozari would appear to wreak havoc again after being sealed. Hence, the result was countless times better than he had expected. However, Bradler couldn't quite accept the fact that such a powerful demon had been killed by Lin Li's Magath. In that case, How terrifying must Lin Li's power be? Apart from Bradler, those who were participating in the battle, as well as the spectators, were all looking at Lin Li with horror in their eyes. They could completely sense that the power of Lin Li's Mageth was several times greater than that of the Mount Tai Mageth that had suppressed Wild Whale Rabu. Clearly, Lin Li had made another huge breakthrough in the field of inscription. At this moment, Lin Li waved his hand, and the Mageth and golden light in the square finally vanished without a trace. All that was left in the center of the square was a silent volcano and Mozari, who was standing on the crater like a statue. Although Lin Li was using his own Mageth to kill the great demon deity Mozari, Lin Li didn't seem very overjoyed. At this point, he had a huge doubt in mind. Since it was possible to kill Mozari, why did the immortal king seal him up instead of killing him back then? Besides, even if the immortal king couldn't kill Mozari, why would he seal him on Four Seasons Island? Countless gods had been sealed on the cursed island, and there was definitely room for a demon deity. While Lin Li was thinking about that question, Bradler and the others finally couldn't help but walk towards Lin Li and cautiously ask him, "President Flick, is that demon already dead?" He didn't blame Bradler and the others for being timid. Even if a powerful existence like the great demon deity Mozari was dead, his body would still pose a huge threat. An example would be the corpse of the Dragon of Destruction that was sealed under Cage Island. Although its soul had long disappeared, the corpse would still have powerful strength that was close to the level of the gods. In other words, its might remained even after its death. Even the corpse of a Wyrm was enough to frighten the timid ones to death. Thus, in the face of the body of the great demon deity Mozari, the surrounding sanctuary powerhouses were at a loss for what to do. In fact, no one dared to approach the body at all. After glancing at Bradler and the others who were worried sick, Lin Li nodded with a smile and said, "Yes, that demon is dead. Your Majesty, you may move that demon's corpse away." Although he already had a conjecture in mind, Bradler and the others finally felt overjoyed when they heard Lin Li's affirmative answer, thinking that they had already overcome the ordeal. One by one, they inched closer to Lin Li and thanked him while showering him with compliments generously. After hearing his words with some amusement, Lin Li soon couldn't bring himself to continue listening to those words. He waved his hands and said, "Fine. You don't have to thank me. This demon happens to have something that I need. You can handle the rest accordingly." It turned out that when Bradler and the others were thanking Lin Li heard a message from Conorus through spiritual connection. He said that he hoped that Lin Li would get the heart of demon from Mozari. Moreover, Lin Li could sense from the mental strength fluctuation that Conorus was clearly suppressing his agitation. The great demon deity Mozari was the true master of the endless abyss, the boss of the 81 ancient demon deities, and the ancestor of the vast majority of demons in the endless abyss. Mozari's heart of demon could be considered the origin of demonic power, so it was naturally very appealing to Conorus, who used to be an ancient demon deity. Hence, Lin Li interrupted Bradler and the others while they complimented him, and told them straight that he wanted something from Mozari. Even though Bradler and the others were unsure of the origin of the demon, they could tell from his powerful strength that was near the level of the gods that the demon's body had to be extremely valuable. Even a Wyrm was a treasure from head to toe. What more a demon that was several times stronger than a Wyrm? However, Bradler wanted to build a good relationship with Lin Li in the first place, and the Gilded Kingdom had managed to avoid the disaster this time, all thanks to Lin Li. How could he possibly turn Lin Li down? Besides, he also noticed that Lin Li had mentioned that he just needed one thing from Mozari's body. At the thought of that, there was nothing for Bradler to be displeased about. He hurriedly nodded and said, "What are you saying, President Flick? It's all thanks to you that the Gilded Kingdom managed to avoid that disaster. Even if you take the entire body away, it'd only be a matter of course." "Okay, you don't have to go on. I only want the thing that I need. You are free to do whatever you want with the rest of it," Lin Li said with a wave of his hand. Seeing that Lin Li had said this, Bradler and the others naturally stopped insisting, and frantically commanded the remaining few giant divine soldiers to carry the lifeless Mozari's body away from the crater. However, there were once again changes in the square. As Mozari's body was moved away, the volcano that emerged from the bottom collapsed in the blink of an eye, as if it had decayed. All that was left was a huge and deep hole in the place where the volcano vanished. It seemed to be bottomless, and there was nothing except the sounds of wind coming from it. On the other hand, Lin Li, who was about to reach for the heart of demon, couldn't help but pause in his actions when the large abyss appeared. He seemed to have vaguely heard some roaring coming from the abyss, which sounded muffled yet somewhat familiar. That made Lin Li feel a little puzzled. When he thought of Mozari, who was sealed here, he couldn't help but wonder if the immortal king had sealed Mozari here for some special reason. However, no matter what, it wasn't a good time to explore the abyss now. and thus Lin Li put this matter aside for the time being while coming close to the large body of the demon Mozari. Mozari's massive body naturally wasn't an ordinary physical body of flesh, but rather every inch of his body was made of condensed mana. It could be said that every piece of his flesh was like a magical crystal. Of course, the body itself was the least valuable part. There were other parts like its magic tendons and bones that were excellent materials useful for creating magical weapons. However, without taking a single glance at those items, Lin Li merely flew towards the chest of the body and pressed his fingers together before swinging them downwards, after which a massive blade of light that was condensed with mana darted out. However, the blade merely produced a clang when it slashed the demon's chest, without leaving a single white mark behind at all. Clearly, the defense of the body did not weaken much because of Mozari's death. Of course, that didn't stump Lin Li. Mozari was already dead anyway, and a dead body couldn't pose much of a difficulty to Lin Li. He didn't bombard the demon's body with great power, and instead raised his hand to take out a crystal pen for inscription. Immediately afterwards, he drew a few strokes in the air. In the blink of an eye, a mageth that didn't seem too complicated appeared in midair again before sealing the chest of the demon's body. As the mageth entered the chest, a fiery red light began to emerge from the spot where the mageth had been inserted, as if it had turned into a pool of molten iron. Immediately afterwards, a massive chest emerged from that spot and slowly rose to midair. As the heart of demon flew outwards, the fire in the chest of the demon body also gradually died out. There wasn't a visible change at all. Conorus, I'll leave this to you. After saying that, Lin Li moved his hand to the side, and the gigantic heart of demon immediately flew towards Conorus, who was near him. Looking at the heart of demon, that was gradually flying near, a look of excitement that couldn't be concealed appeared on Conorus' face. For a demon, the heart of a demon ancestor like Mozari was definitely considered a sacred object. He had never thought that he would one day be able to obtain Mozari's heart. As the heart of demon flew closer, Conorus began to chant a long and obscure incantation in the language of the ancient demon deities. Each rune that he chanted would instantly condense into solid characters and symbols that glistened with golden light. The appearance of each character would also cause a tremor in space. The words that Conorus chanted were aligned neatly in midair, forming an ancient scroll that contained ancient meanings dating back to a long time ago. They also emanated a daunting aura that would shake the people's hearts. Under Conorus' manipulation, the ancient scroll moved towards the heart of demon. As each character in the scroll was imprinted on the large heart of demon, the heart of demon seemed to have begun shrinking in size. The magic flames that were initially wrapped around the heart of demon seemed to have solidified too. It could be seen with the naked eye that countless cracks were continuously appearing in space baked by the magic flames. Immediately afterwards, a vast and majestic mana wave emerged from Conorus' body. His body was engulfed in light, resembling a god that had descended from heaven, and was repeatedly enlarging. In the blink of an eye, Conorus' body was already more than 10 meters tall. From the looks of his form, he seemed to have become a half-ethereal existence. However, at this moment, Lin Li received another message from Conorus, who was asking for help. After all, Conorus' control of this perfect body had yet to reach the level of flawlessness. Hence, problems surfaced when he was fusing the heart of demon with his body. Lin Li immediately waved his hand, and an arcane mageth instantly emerged from the void. It then seemed to form a bridge between Conorus and the heart of demon. With the activation of the mageth, Conorus' body began to grow again. In no time, he reached a height of over 100 meters, and was almost as large as the body of the great demon deity, Mozari. At the same time, the heart of demon, which was at the other end of the mageth, was also pulled downwards by a certain force. It was then attached to Conorus' chest, and it began squeezing its way into it. When the heart of demon sank completely into Conorus' chest, he suddenly raised his head and roared into the sky. His roar seemed to be tangible as it instantly pierced through countless layers of the void before forming a black hole that was more than 10,000 meters in diameter in the sky. In fact, it was as if there was a turbulence that flashed past in front of the black hole. The crowd in the square was stunned by the roar that Conorus had let out. Those who were weaker were even shaken to the point that blood seeped out of their ears. Even the sanctuary powerhouses had a clear feeling that their souls would be torn apart. One by one, they couldn't help but release their domain worlds. However, after Conorus roared, there were no longer any movements, because the heart of demon had already fused completely into his chest. Immediately afterwards, numerous cracks began to appear on his skin like in a dried-up riverbed. Black magic flames even began to spread from his skin. The black magic flames had initially started licking the skin and the surroundings like tongues when it first appeared from the rift. However, the flames soon became even more ferocious, and they eventually merged to form a single flame shrouding Connor's entire body in fire as if he was a human torch. The rolling magic flames began to spread out in all directions from Connor's body. Even though the people around him were far away from it, they could still feel a piercing pain surge within their bodies. However, their souls felt like they were getting baked under the hot sun. That made them feel immensely miserable and agonized under the alternating extreme temperatures. Only after they had retreated to the outermost part of the square did they feel much better. The solid and sturdy lazurite beneath Connor's feet began to emit cracking sounds continuously before crumbling into pieces, and then further into ashes. In the blink of an eye, most of the square seemed to have turned into a desert, with Connor's in the middle. Each and every particle was wrapped in magic flames, making it seem like a sea of black magic flames. At this moment, Lin Li was continuously communicating with Connor's through soul contact. Connor's would inform Lin Li about his difficulties, while Lin Li waved his hand and drew a Magath to help Connor's overcome one difficulty after another. Thanks to the help of Lin Li's Magaths, Connor's managed to fuse the heart of demon with his body confidently and bravely. Otherwise, he would have probably been burned to ashes long ago. Lin Li continued to draw a Magath that flew into the magic flames that engulfed Connor's, allowing his condition to stabilize soon. At this moment, the magical flames that emerged from Connor's body already converged within a certain range, and it looked just like a giant egg on black fire from afar. Apart from the black flames that were continuously licking around, countless dazzling gold magic runes began rotating around. Just like that, a day passed in the blink of an eye, and the Gilded Kingdom had already begun to deal with the aftermath of the matter. The most important thing to do now was to repair the giant divine soldiers that Mozari had destroyed. Due to Connor's presence, no one could walk into the inner area of the square, and thus it couldn't be cleaned up or repaired. Lin Li stood at the side, and would draw a Magath from time to time, to help Connor's resolve issues. However, towards the end, Lin Li's frequency of striking began to reduce incessantly, while the magic flames that Connor's was shrouded in had already become a beating heart as it started pounding forcefully. The beating sound seemed like a dull roar of thunder that emitted various waves together with the surrounding air. As time passed, the sound of the heartbeat was becoming clearer as well as more and more powerful. However, the power that it emitted was no longer as unsettling as in the beginning. Finally, the magic flames that were wrapped around Connor's began to fade to transparency, gradually revealing Connor's body. It was just a vague and blurry figure in the beginning, but as the magic flames became smaller and smaller, the figure got increasingly clearer too. However, at this moment, Connor's appearance had changed drastically with the fusion of the heart of demon. His size was restored to a stature of nearly 2 meters, but there was a pair of large fleshy wings burning with black flames on his back as well as a pair of scimitar-like demonic horns on the top of his head. His perfect body had initially been as handsome as the high elves, but now that he had these demonic features and black demonic runes all over his body, Connor's immediately began to exude a demonic aura. A moment later, all the magic flames were fused into Connor's body, but the demonic wings and horns on his head were still present. The demonic runes on Connor's body were also vague and faint, but they didn't completely vanish. At the same time, a huge wave of mana emanated from Connor's body, and it started surging in all directions like a flood. Bradler and the others, who were dealing with the aftermath around the square, all had a drastic change in expression after sensing the terrifying mana wave. If they hadn't seen Connor's standing in the center of the square, Bradler and others might have thought that Mozari had risen again. However, after seeing that the one who emitted the terrifying mana waves was Connor's, Lin Li's subordinate, they felt rather uneasy too. The Tower of Dusk now had yet another terrifying sanctuary powerhouse. In addition to the sanctuary-level vampire, Norfaller, the small and nameless force, the Tower of Dusk now had 3 sanctuary powerhouses. With such elite manpower, no one would dare to call them a small and insignificant force. In the future, the Tower of Dusk would definitely become a top force that was not to be belittled. At this moment, the mana waves that were emitted from Connor's body had not only broken through the limits of the legendary realm, but also reached the peak of level 28. That was because Connor's had yet to fuse with the Heart of Demon completely. Otherwise, the power of the Heart of Demon alone would completely be enough to push his power to the peak of the sanctuary realm. However, such an external force would not be sufficient to push him to the divine realm. Only when Connor's lit up the divine fire with his own power would he be able to truly become a great demon deity like Mozari. Of course, once he reached the divine realm, he could once again get a huge boost from the Heart of Demon. All the flames had now been contained in his body, and he wasn't exuding a single wisp of demonic aura either. Connor's looked at his hands with satisfaction, as if he could see how terrifying the power emitted by his hands could be. After feeling his power for a few moments, Connor's turned to Lin Li with a smug expression and said, "Haha, Flick, I've known for a long time that I'd definitely gain endless benefits from following you, but getting Mozar's origin is still beyond my expectations. Mozari no longer belongs to this world now, and not only have I obtained his power, but I will also replace him, and become the new master of the endless abyss." However, Lin Li was now far less eager to gain a stronger subordinate, especially after having gone through the bottom of the cursed island where he experienced the numerous tests that Garesco had left behind. They made him realize that, when faced with divine-level opponents, it would be difficult for peak sanctuary realm powerhouses to provide help for him. What Lin Li was really interested in was the matter of Conorus becoming the master of the endless abyss. Although the High Elves had plundered the endless abyss, it was still a treasure vault full of infinite resources, especially the last floor of the abyss that High Lord Osric hadn't penetrated. God knew how many rare resources had been left behind there. The current Sky Castle was still going through an orderly transformation according to Lin Li's design, but the biggest problem at the moment was still the severe shortage of construction resources and materials. Even the treasure vaults of the several kingdoms combined might not be enough to meet the requirements for the overhaul of the Sky Castle. Hence, compared to Conor's strength that had broken through to level 28, which was at the Sanctuary Realm, Lin Li attached greater importance to the fact that Conorus had now become the next master of the Endless Abyss. However, at this time, Lin Li did not immediately bring up the matter of emptying the Endless Abyss, but instead focused his attention on the abyss that appeared after the volcano vanished. This abyss was supposed to be the place where the great demon deity Mozari was sealed, and there shouldn't be anything more after Mozari had been gotten rid of. However, when helping Conorus fuse the heart of demon, Lin Li vaguely felt that the sudden wind in the abyss seemed to be carrying a familiar roar. Although Lin Li wasn't sure if the roaring he heard was real or not, the curiosity that surged in his heart made him feel a strong urge to enter the deep cavern and find out. After ending the fusion of the heart of demon, Lin Li also made up his mind and decided to enter the cave to take a look. Even if there wasn't anything in there, they could at least tell that the sealing Mageth that sealed the great demon deity Mozari should also be of great help to his attainments and inscription. After making up his mind, Lin Li instructed Conorus to guard outside the bottomless cavern while he leapt into it. From the moment he leapt into the abyss, Lin Li could already sense that the roaring was getting clearer and clearer in the wind. He also discovered that he could decipher the meaning of the roar as it seemed to be incessant cursing with boundless resentment. The target was none other than the immortal king. Lin Li's curiosity was piqued, and he immediately sped up in his descent while also expanding his domain world to guard against sudden dangers. As Lin Li delved deeper, the roaring and hissing coming from the depths of that cave had become clearer and clearer. At the same time, the meaning of the roar had also become clearer to him. "Damned immortal king, let me out. I want to leave this world and curse you. I'll curse you to give birth to a son with no buttocks, sores on his head, and pus-filled boils on his feet. I'll curse your mom and your sister." After deciphering the meaning of the curse, Lin Li almost lost his balance and fell. Regardless of how he looked at it, the curse didn't seem to be from Anril. It seemed that only in the world he had come from would there be people cursing others in such a manner. In particular, it was similar to the way the players of the game, Endless World, would curse at others. That made Lin Li even more curious as he wondered if he wasn't the only one who had transmigrated to this world. After falling in the dark cavern for a long time, Lin Li's feet finally touched the ground. Immediately afterwards, he saw an altar-like structure not far ahead. The altar was shrouded in light, and there was a black shadow in the middle that was hitting the light curtain around him while cursing incessantly. Perhaps because he had detected Lin Li's arrival, the figure in the light curtain finally stopped and roared at Lin Li, "Human, let me leave this place, and I can grant you 3 wishes. I don't need incredible strength or power, but I want an infinite amount of wealth." Lin Li fell silent again after hearing his words, which reminded him of the fairy tales of the world he transmigrated from, such as releasing a deity from a drifting bottle, or gathering 7 Dragon Balls to summon a divine dragon. Lin Li did not approach the altar recklessly, and instead began observing from afar, only to discover that the altar was surrounded by a complicated divine smith-level Mageth, which had 2 cores, one of which was an altar, and the other was an empty space. Hence, the power of the Mageth was waning. Seeing this, Lin Li thought of the great demon deity Mozari again. Clearly, Mozari had been sealed here all along, and it seemed to have been in the other core of the Mageth. That made him think of another question, and that was why the immortal king sealed Mozari on 4 Seasons Island instead of the Cursed Island. Could it be that the main figure that the immortal king wanted to seal was not Mozari, but the figure on this altar that keeps cursing? Was Mozari sealed here for the purpose of providing power for the Mageth used to seal and suppress that existence on the altar? Hence, regardless of what was on the altar, The first thing Lin Li did was not to go up there and figure out what it was, but rather he thought of a way to master the Mageth on it. As long as he could master the Mageth, he would be able to be in control of the situation when facing the thing on the altar. Although Lin Li had yet to become a true divine smith of inscription, he had the support of the foundation of the previous research that he had done on a divine smith level Mageth. Hence, it wasn't too big of a problem. It was just like how a person who did not know how to build a car was not necessarily unable to drive a car. Mastering the divine smith level Mageth was far simpler than learning how to draw it. It took only less than an hour for Lin Li to fully understand the operation of this divine smith level Mageth. While Lin Li was studying the divine smith level Mageth, the shadow on the altar was constantly shouting at him. In short, it kept promising him plenty of tempting conditions. But after seeing that he still couldn't make Lin Li waver despite the temptation, the shadow started threatening him menacingly. Damned ant, didn't you hear what I said? If you help me get out of here now, I'll still thank you for it. But if you continue ignoring my presence again, I'll definitely teach you a lesson when I get out. Although the shadow that was shrouded in light had a blurry appearance, the tone of its voice was clearly full of anger. Finally, Lin Li stopped studying the Mageths around him and shifted his attention onto the altar that was enveloped in light instead. He quickly made some gestures with his hands, and some of the Mageths around the altar, which had been somewhat stagnant, immediately began to operate again. As the Mageths began running, the light on the altar also became thinner and eventually dissipated, revealing the figure that was wailing incessantly on the altar. When the altar was completely clear, Lin Li realized that the shadow who kept cursing incessantly was actually a dragon-like creature that was about the size of a dog. Based on its appearance, it seemed to be a wyrm, but its size was obviously countless times smaller than the average wyrms. Among the various species of wyrms, perhaps only elemental dragons would produce such a pocket-sized descendant. However, elemental dragons were much smaller than this creature, and even an adult elemental dragon was no larger than a dog. Moreover, Lin Li had the elemental dragon, Xiaohua, as his subordinate, so he was very clear about the appearance of elemental dragons. Thus, he was certain that this black creature in front of him definitely had nothing to do with elemental dragons. In Lin Li's eyes, this thing on the altar was actually more like a scaled-down version of a black dragon, as its body was covered in obsidian-like scales, and it had a pair of bloodshot eyes, 2 horns on top of its head, and a pair of fleshy wings on its back. Lin Li was reminded of the dragon of destruction, Azardus, that he had killed using his hunter avatar in the Endless World game. But of course it only resembled Azardus if size wasn't an issue. Is this a descendant of the dragon of destruction? If it's a young dragon, it would seem plausible for it to be of this size. Could this be a young black dragon? Lin Li made a wild guess, but as soon as that conjecture surfaced in his mind, he vetoed it immediately. Lin Li had seen young dragons before. Although wyrms were powerful creatures, their young also shared similar characteristics with the young of other animals, with the most obvious being a large head, small body, and short limbs. It was a type of law of evolution for species, which applied even to dragons and wyrms. However, this black dragon on the altar did not have any childlike features, even though its body was only the size of a dog. Its limbs were very proportional, and it just seemed to be a scaled-down version of an adult wyrm. Looking at the black dragon, who kept roaring and cursing while also issuing threats at the same time, Lin Li, who had already figured out the sealing Mageth on this altar, decisively stepped onto it. Seeing that Lin Li had barged into the altar, the black dragon immediately pounced on him, while seething, showing its fangs, and waving its claws. At the same time, it roared, "Damned ant, since you refuse to help me leave this hellhole, you will stay with me here." After roaring, the black dragon spewed at Lin Li a mouthful of black dragon breath, which contained an aura that could cause everything to wither. It surged towards Lin Li immediately. However, a dragon breath as such posed no threat to Lin Li, who had already gained control of the seal. Without even picking up his magic staff, he simply fanned away the smoke in front of him with his hand, pushing it to the side. Lin Li then moved, and appeared in front of the black dragon almost instantly. He then reached a hand out to pinch the skin on the nape of the black dragon to pick it up like it were a cat. "Damn it, let go of me. The great dragon of destruction Azardus is not your pet. If you don't let go now, you're dead meat because you'll face my boundless wrath." The black dragon growled and cursed while flailing its limbs about, fluttering its fleshy wings, and whipping its tail in an attempt to struggle and break free. Lin Li was shocked to hear the black dragon's roar, and he thought, this guy actually called himself Azardus, the dragon of destruction. How is this possible? The dragon of destruction's corpse was still lying in Lin Li's ring of endless storm, and he had brought it over from the Endless World game. Besides, another corpse of the dragon of destruction was sealed under Cage Island in the breezy plains, having been killed by the immortal king in this world. In that case, How could this annoying black dragon be the dragon of destruction? At this moment, Lin Li felt his hand turning empty as the black dragon, which he was holding by the nape just a few moments ago, seemed to have turned into air. Immediately afterwards, the black dragon flapped its fleshy wings and flew towards the other side of the altar. How dare a small fry like you disrespect the great dragon of destruction as artist? Well then, prepare to face my boundless wrath. The black dragon roared menacingly, seemingly ready to fight Lin Li to the death. However, after it got into a fight stance, it surprisingly turned its body violently and leapt out of the altar. It turned out that it had planned to just escape like that. However, since Lin Li had already mastered the sealing mageth on the altar, how could the black dragon escape so easily? When the black dragon had already reached the edge of the altar, and was only a mere inch away from escaping, it seemed to hit a layer of glass, with a loud thud, and it slowly slid downwards along something, and fell onto the ground. At this moment, Lin Li did not immediately go over to catch the black dragon, but instead raised his hand to look at his moving fingers. The change just now was somewhat beyond his expectations, as he was confident that he was definitely capable of holding something firmly with his hand. Clearly, the problem lay with the black dragon. With that thought in mind, Lin Li immediately spread his mental strength outwards to the black dragon that had just slipped to the ground. However, the result of his mental strength detection took him aback, because the black dragon wasn't in a tangible form, but rather it was in a soul-like state. However, the soul-like form that the black dragon was in was already solid and sturdy enough to almost seem tangible. That answered Lin Li's question as to how the black dragon had miraculously escaped from his hand just now. Clearly, the black dragon had temporarily returned its nape to a state of nothingness when it realized that it couldn't break free, thus leaving Lin Li with nothing to grasp. With this discovery, Lin Li also became more and more interested in this peculiar black dragon. He knew that the immortal king had to have sealed it there for some reason, and he reckoned that the black dragon was probably of an incredible origin. Lin Li was now still a little uncertain if it was his artist, the dragon of destruction, as it was possible for him to be a legacy of the dragon of destruction, just like Tutankhamun. At this point, the black dragon had already flown up from the ground, and was obviously aware that it couldn't break out of the altar. Thus, it turned to face Lin Li again, and bared its teeth in a bid to make itself look ferocious and menacing. It roared, "Human, let me out of here immediately, or else don't blame me for being unceremonious. Even though you possess the strength of the sanctuary realm, you are still a nobody to his artist, the dragon of destruction. You can never afford to incur my wrath." However, Lin Li glanced at it nonchalantly with a contemptuous gaze, and said in response, "As artist, the dragon of destruction. As far as I know, the dragon of destruction was killed by the immortal king thousands of years ago, and even its corpse has been sealed and suppressed under a deserted island." To Lin Li's surprise, the black dragon flew into a rage at the mention of the immortal king, and he roared at the top of its lungs, "The immortal king! Again, it's the immortal king! That damned scoundrel brought me to this world with the sole purpose of satisfying his curiosity. In the end, he sealed me in this place where I can't see the light of day nor the darkness of night. He even left a stinking, pungent demon here. One day, I will exact my revenge on him. But now, you must set me free immediately. Ha ha, what a peculiar existence. In this case, I will see what you're made of." Lin Li didn't take his roar seriously at all, and just vanished into thin air abruptly. By the time he reappeared, he had once again picked the black dragon up in his hand. However, he was well prepared this time, and had utilized his mental strength when catching the black dragon, lest it used the same method of turning its body into nothingness in order to escape. However, after sensing Lin Li's mental strength, the black dragon suddenly stopped struggling, and began chuckling while saying, "Ha ha, so it's you. I didn't expect you to come here too. So, how is it? Are you enjoying yourself here in this disgusting world? Have you ever tried having someone conduct experiments on you, and then seal you in a hellhole like this for thousands of years?" Lin Li was initially still squinting and grinning while waiting for the black dragon to spout some more nonsense, but after hearing the black dragon's words, he suddenly felt a chill down his spine. What does it mean? Lin Li's eyes were wide open, and he even almost loosened his grip on the black dragon. He yelled, "What did you say? What do you mean I'm here too? What do you mean, how is it going in this world?" The black dragon immediately became smug when it saw Lin Li's reaction, and it gazed at him gloatingly like he was looking at a pitiful person. "Why, are you frightened just like that? In your slang, we could be considered to be from the same hometown. You should be tearing up when you see me." Hearing the black dragon's words, Lin Li immediately thought about how he had found the black dragon's curses, promises, and threats to be rather familiar just now, such as cursing him to have a child with birth defect, and the granting of 3 wishes. Lin Li wondered, could it be that this black dragon is also a transmigrator and Anral, just like me? Seeing that Lin Li was somewhat stunned, the black dragon sneered, and said with more derision, "Oh right, I've been sealed for too long, and I almost forgot that it was you who killed me the first time I died, but you probably didn't expect someone to hack into your game account and bring you to such a hellish place, where there is no return. You humans seem to hold your kin and loved ones close to your heart, but have you ever thought about your parents or your lover? Oh, I forgot. How can someone like you who's completely addicted to and immersed in the world of the game have a lover? Ha ha. As the black dragon spoke, it burst into laughter and seemed to be venting its frustration and anger. It even rocked backwards and was laughing so hard that it could barely catch its breath. However, Lin Li, who was beside him, was stunned by his words. In fact, he even felt an inexplicable pang of panic that arose from the bottom of his heart. Who exactly are you? Why do you know about these things? Lin Li's face was a bit pale, and he no longer had the composure of a sanctuary powerhouse. His transmigration was definitely his biggest secret, and now that the black dragon had revealed it, he was so astounded that he immediately forgot about his identity as a sanctuary powerhouse. The black dragon finally stopped guffawing and raised its head to look at Lin Li before saying, "Why? Haven't I made myself clear enough? I'm Azardus, the dragon of destruction and one of the dragon aspects of the endless world." One of the dragon aspects of the endless world. After linking those words to what the black dragon had said previously, Lin Li seemed to have finally figured it out. The black dragon was indeed Azardus, the dragon of destruction, except it wasn't the dragon of destruction from Anril, but from the endless world game. The dragon of destruction of Anril had been killed by the immortal king, after which Tutankhamun and Nifa were hatched from the magical crystal. According to the immortal king's method, Lin Li hatched the magical crystal of the dragon of destruction of the endless world. After a long time, he still hadn't hatched anything, and thus he had long suspected that the magical crystal was missing something. Now, it seemed that the likely reason for it was the lack of the dragon of destruction's soul in the magical crystal of the dragon of destruction of the endless world. "You are Azardus of the endless world. How did you come to this world?" Lin Li asked with some difficulty. The black dragon, or rather Azardus the dragon of destruction, finally laughed out loud again and exclaimed, "Haha, do you finally remember it now? How did I end up here? Of course it's because of you. If you hadn't killed me with the hunter avatar, how could I have followed that hunter that was occupied by the immortal king and ended up in this hellish place?" "What did you say?" "The immortal king occupied my hunter." Lin Li was once again frightened. Although Lin Li had always felt that there was an 80% chance that his transmigration to his world was related to the immortal king, what Azardus said was still beyond his expectation. It also allowed Lin Li to figure out why he resembled the immortal king that much, why he met the hunter-like shadow in the Well of the Sun, why the endless labyrinth, which was known only to him, would appear in the Sky Castle, and why many things that existed only in the endless world would appear in Anril. Lin Li seemed to have found the answers to all his questions at this point. It turned out that, in a sense, he and the immortal king were indeed the same person. "Wait a minute, it's only been a few years since I transmigrated to this world, but the immortal king has already sealed you here for thousands of years." Lin Li eagerly questioned Azardus when he thought of a problem with the chronology, which was like a straw to clutch at. Although Lin Li had obtained plenty of the immortal king's legacies, he still couldn't accept the fact that he shared such a relationship with the immortal king. Even though he only had a slim chance to overturn that conclusion, he wasn't willing to give it up. However, Azardus sneered twice and disdainfully said, "You now have the strength of the sanctuary realm. Can't you figure it out yet? With the immortal king's capabilities, manipulating time is a piece of cake for him." Azardus' words finally made Lin Li give up. Given the gods sealed under the cursed island, it was already clear that the immortal king's strength had already reached a height that was enough for him to override the gods. With the immortal king's capabilities, it was indeed not too remarkable a feat to be able to roam freely in the river of time. Although manipulating time and traveling through time seemed unimaginable for most people, even the dragon of time, which was one of the 5 dragon aspects, had the ability to do so. What more, the immortal king, who had managed to kill the dragon of destruction, and whose strength was far beyond that of the 5 dragon aspects. Perhaps the dragon of time, that had gone missing a long time ago, had already been dealt with by the immortal king, just like the dragon of destruction. Lin Li finally understood what Garesko's shadow meant when he told him that another version of himself would return the favor in the mage tower of the cursed island. The immortal king used Lin Li's hunter avatar to transmigrate back to Anril, and that was considered quite a huge favor to the immortal king. However, what Lin Li still couldn't figure out was why the immortal king had adopted such an exaggerated approach to return the favor to him. He had brought Lin Li to Anril without seeking his permission, and even made arrangements for him to progress rapidly from an insignificant mage apprentice to a sanctuary powerhouse. Although Lin Li was very satisfied with the achievements that he had made so far because they were, after all, things that he couldn't have accomplished in the world he came from, he didn't feel at ease. He felt like he had become someone else's pawn, especially after the mysteries of everything had been unraveled. According to Garesco's shadow, the immortal king was returning a favor to Lin Li, but it didn't seem right to do so by turning Lin Li into a pawn. Lin Li had a conjecture that the reason behind the immortal king's actions definitely wasn't as simple as returning a favor, but rather he might have a hidden agenda. However, given Lin Li's current ability, he was far from being qualified to have a conversation with the immortal king on equal footing, and it was even more impossible for him to find out the immortal king's real motive. Of course, Lin Li could be certain that the purpose that the immortal king wanted him to achieve in this world as the immortal king's pawn would definitely come to light one day. Now, the best he could do was to improve his strength as much as possible so that he might one day be able to get rid of the status of a pawn. After a long time, the shock that Azardus' words had brought to Lin Li finally dissipated as Lin Li began to calm down. He knew that regardless of what problems he was going to face and what the immortal king's agenda was, the only thing he needed to and could do at present was to become stronger. There was no point in dwelling on the other issues. Having figured that out, Lin Li's gaze also regained clarity as he looked at Azardus, who was in the form of a soul. He said, "All right then, your words have provided the answer to a long-standing doubt I've had. So, what are your plans now? Are you going to stay here, or follow me out?" "Of course I'm going to go out. Who would want to continue staying in such a **type place? Azardus was excited to hear Lin Li's words, but he immediately became sullen again. Staring at Lin Li with suspicion, he asked, "Why? Are you planning to open this seal and let me out of here?" However, Lin Li shook his head, glanced at the surroundings of the altar, and said, "The thing that was used to seal you is a divine smith level mage. Although I can enter and leave freely, I can't bring you out like this." Lin Li wasn't deceiving Azardus, for a divine smith level mage really wasn't that easy to undo. Although Lin Li had done some in-depth research on divine smith level mages and even gained some knowledge thereof, he was still far from being able to undo a divine smith level mage. With his attainments in inscription, it would be a Herculean task to break the seal and take Azardus away. However, as soon as he heard Lin Li's words, Azardus flew into a rage and hollered at Lin Li, "Are you playing a prank on me? If that's the case, why are you asking me that question?" It was no wonder that Azardus was so enraged. If it were anyone else, they would definitely feel horrible to be given hope while in a state of despair and hopelessness, only to have their hopes dashed again a moment later. Besides, Azardus had blamed his tragic state on Lin Li to a certain extent, so he naturally wouldn't think of him as a nice person. However, Lin Li wasn't annoyed. He simply glanced at Azardus calmly, and after the latter's emotions stabilized a little, he smilingly said, "It's true that I can't take you away just like that, but there's another method, though it will require a compromise. Are you willing to accept it?" Azardus had initially already calmed down, but Lin Li made him get worked up again. However, he didn't curse loudly anymore, and instead sneered, "A method that requires me to compromise. Tell me then, what method can I use to get out of here?" "Actually, this method is very simple," Lin Li said while taking out a hideous-looking stone from the Ring of Endless Storm, which was Azardus' dragon crystal. Immediately afterwards, he said, "I can let you enter this dragon crystal so that your form of existence will change. That would be tantamount to disappearing from the seal, and so you would naturally be able to break free from the restraint of this seal." Although Azardus wanted to leave this place very much, it didn't mean that he would lose his ability to think straight. After hearing the solution that Lin Li proposed, he did not immediately agree to it, but instead sized Lin Li up from head to toe for a while before cautiously saying, "Since it requires a compromise, I'm afraid I have to bear a lot of consequences, right?" Lin Li didn't intend to hide it from him, and nodded honestly. He said, "Nothing in this world is perfect. Since it's an approach that requires some tricks, it will naturally come with some flaws. The flaw of this method is that after you enter this dragon crystal, you will never be able to leave again. In other words, I'll still be sealed, but just in a different place from here, right?" Azardus asked with a tone of derision, seemingly mocking Lin Li and also mocking himself self-deprecatingly for being in such a predicament. "You can say that, so, you can make your choice now. Do you want to continue being sealed here, or move to another place? To say the least, you can still look at the outside world, if you're sealed in the magical crystal," Lin Li said as he weighed the dragon crystal in his hand. "Ha ha." Azardus laughed, seemingly resigned to his fate. He said to Lin Li, "Okay, as long as I can get out of here, I'll do your bidding. What do I have to do?" Hence, Lin Li told Azardus to give up on resisting, and then chanted a demonic rune under his breath, and it was the very same one that he used when subduing the Lord of Darkness, with the dragon crystal. Given the level of his artist's strength, the demonic rune would not work as long as he had a wisp of conscious resistance. However, he indeed wavered due to Lin Li's words. A few moments later, Azardus turned into a mass of light and flew into the dragon crystal in Lin Li's hand. Immediately afterwards, the dragon crystal, which was initially extremely hideous, changed drastically. It seemed to have turned into a dazzling pearl that was shining brightly under several brilliant rays of light. As Azardus' aura and breath vanished from the altar, the surrounding seal also changed immediately. The mana that was initially calm seemed to have become extremely menacing and explosive like a storm in the ocean. The entire cave also began to shake violently, while large chunks of stone landed everywhere. Lin Li didn't dare to procrastinate or slow down at all as he frantically retreated from the altar before slashing open a spatial rift in the air and stepping into it. Almost simultaneously with Lin Li's departure, the cave already started collapsing violently, and everything around the altar and the seal was buried in the depths of the earth in the blink of an eye. When Lin Li came out of the spatial rift, he was already in the sky above the square. At this moment, the abyss seemed to have turned into a massive vortex that pulled in everything in the square. Fortunately, there was no longer anyone else in the square at this moment. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't escape the fate of being buried in the cave. After more than an hour, the vibrations in the ground finally stopped, and the Gilded Kingdom's upper square had almost vanished too. The lazurite the ground was paved with had also been sucked into the cavern, turning into a filler for it. The entire square turned into a small basin, while the center, which wasn't filled, turned into a large, deep pit. Immediately afterwards, the people of the Gilded Kingdom, who noticed the strange situation, as well as the representatives of the various forces, rushed over. However, when they arrived, Lin Li had already left the square and returned to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk. Thus, all that they saw was the wreckage and ruins of the square, but none of them knew what had actually happened here. Lin Li's team returned to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk, and Connorus, who was originally guarding the mouth of the cave, finally found the chance to ask Lin Li about what happened in the abyss. However, since the matter involved the secret of his transmigration, Lin Li merely gave Connorus a brief account of what happened while withholding some information. He then asked Connorus, "You said that you can already replace Mozari, so will those demons of the Endless Abyss and the Demon Lords become an obstacle for you in taking charge of the Endless Abyss?" Now that Connorus had fused Mozari's heart of demon with his body, it was akin to becoming the successor of Mozari. However, his current strength had yet to reach the divine realm, and there were countless powerful demon lords in the Endless Abyss. Hence, it was still unknown if they would willingly concede to him and accept him to be their master. An extremely bold concept had already surfaced in Lin Li's mind because he was no longer satisfied with the current small-scale transformation of the Sky Castle. The abundant resources in the Endless Abyss were the foundation necessary for his bold idea. Hence, whether or not Connorus could gain full control of the Endless Abyss was very important to him. After hearing Lin Li's question, Connorus smiled confidently as he said, "Don't worry, Fulik, I've already obtained the method to control the Endless Abyss from the heart of demon. As long as those demons are within the abyss, they will be subject to the abyssal force regardless of how strong they are. Hence, subduing them is not a problem at all." Alright then. Lin Li was thrilled to hear his answer, and he immediately gleefully said, "Return to the abyss immediately and mobilize all the resources in the Endless Abyss. I need a huge amount of resources and materials for the transformation of the Sky Castle." Although Connorus was now the master of the Endless Abyss, and everything in the abyss could be considered his belongings, Connorus wasn't stingy after hearing Lin Li's request. On the one hand, he was still bound by the soul contract with Lin Li, and on the other hand, he didn't feel the pinch, because he had gained all of this effortlessly. The Dragon of Destruction of Anral had been killed by the Immortal King, after which Tutankhamun and Nifa were hatched from the magical crystal. According to the Immortal King's method, Lin Li hatched the magical crystal of the Dragon of Destruction of the Endless World. After a long time, he still hadn't hatched anything, and thus he had long suspected that the magical crystal was missing something. Now, it seemed that the likely reason for it was the lack of the Dragon of Destruction's soul in the magical crystal of the Dragon of Destruction of the Endless World. "You are Azardus of the Endless World. How did you come to this world?" Lin Li asked with some difficulty. The Black Dragon, or rather Azardus the Dragon of Destruction, finally laughed out loud again, and exclaimed, "Haha, do you finally remember it now? How did I end up here? Of course it's because of you. If you hadn't killed me with the hunter Avatar, how could I have followed that hunter that was occupied by the Immortal King and ended up in this hellish place?" "What did you say?" "The Immortal King occupied my hunter." Lin Li was once again frightened. Although Lin Li had always felt that there was an 80% chance that his transmigration to his world was related to the Immortal King, What Azardus said was still beyond his expectation. It also allowed Lin Li to figure out why he resembled the immortal king that much, why he met the hunter-like shadow in the Well of the Sun, why the endless labyrinth, which was known only to him, would appear in the Sky Castle, and why many things that existed only in the endless world would appear in Anral. Lin Li seemed to have found the answers to all his questions at this point. It turned out that, in a sense, he and the immortal king were indeed the same person. Wait a minute. It's only been a few years since I transmigrated to this world, but the immortal king has already sealed you here for thousands of years. Lin Li eagerly questioned Azardus when he thought of a problem with the chronology, which was like a straw to clutch at. Although Lin Li had obtained plenty of the immortal king's legacies, he still couldn't accept the fact that he shared such a relationship with the immortal king. Even though he only had a slim chance to overturn that conclusion, he wasn't willing to give it up. However, Azardus sneered twice and disdainfully said, "You now have the strength of the sanctuary realm. Can't you figure it out yet? With the immortal king's capabilities, manipulating time is a piece of cake for him." Azardus' words finally made Lin Li give up. Given the gods sealed under the cursed island, it was already clear that the immortal king's strength had already reached a height that was enough for him to override the gods. With the immortal king's capabilities, it was indeed not too remarkable a feat to be able to roam freely in the river of time. Although manipulating time and traveling through time seemed unimaginable for most people, even the Dragon of Time, which was one of the 5 dragon aspects, had the ability to do so. What more, the immortal king, who had managed to kill the Dragon of Destruction, and whose strength was far beyond that of the 5 dragon aspects. Perhaps the Dragon of Time, that had gone missing a long time ago, had already been dealt with by the immortal king, just like the Dragon of Destruction. Lin Li finally understood what Garesko's shadow meant when he told him that another version of himself would return the favor in the Mage Tower of the Cursed Island. The immortal king used Lin Li's hunter avatar to transmigrate back to Anral, and that was considered quite a huge favor to the immortal king. However, what Lin Li still couldn't figure out was why the immortal king had adopted such an exaggerated approach to return the favor to him. He had brought Lin Li to Anral without seeking his permission, and even made arrangements for him to progress rapidly from an insignificant mage apprentice to a sanctuary powerhouse. Although Lin Li was very satisfied with the achievements that he had made so far because they were, after all, things that he couldn't have accomplished in the world he came from, he didn't feel at ease. He felt like he had become someone else's pawn, especially after the mysteries of everything had been unraveled. According to Garesko's shadow, the immortal king was returning a favor to Lin Li, but it didn't seem right to do so by turning Lin Li into a pawn. Lin Li had a conjecture that the reason behind the immortal king's actions definitely wasn't as simple as returning a favor, but rather he might have a hidden agenda. However, given Lin Li's current ability, he was far from being qualified to have a conversation with the immortal king on equal footing, and it was even more impossible for him to find out the immortal king's real motive. Of course, Lin Li could be certain that the purpose that the immortal king wanted him to achieve in this world as the immortal king's pawn would definitely come to light one day. Now, the best he could do was to improve his strength as much as possible so that he might one day be able to get rid of the status of a pawn. After a long time, the shock that Azardus' words had brought to Lin Li finally dissipated as Lin Li began to calm down. He knew that regardless of what problems he was going to face and what the immortal king's agenda was, the only thing he needed to and could do at present was to become stronger. There was no point in dwelling on the other issues. Having figured that out, Lin Li's gaze also regained clarity as he looked at Azardus, who was in the form of a soul. He said, "All right then, your words have provided the answer to a long-standing doubt I've had. So, what are your plans now? Are you going to stay here, or follow me out?" "Of course I'm going to go out. Who would want to continue staying in such a **type place? Azardus was excited to hear Lin Li's words, but he immediately became sullen again. Staring at Lin Li with suspicion, he asked, "Why? Are you planning to open this seal and let me out of here?" However, Lin Li shook his head, glanced at the surroundings of the altar, and said, "The thing that was used to seal you is a divine smith level mageth. Although I can enter and leave freely, I can't bring you out like this." Lin Li wasn't deceiving Azardus, for a divine smith level mageth really wasn't that easy to undo. Although Lin Li had done some in-depth research on divine smith level mageths, and even gained some knowledge thereof, he was still far from being able to undo a divine smith level mageth. With his attainments in inscription, it would be a Herculean task to break the seal and take Azardus away. However, as soon as he heard Lin Li's words, Azardus flew into a rage and hollered at Lin Li, "Are you playing a prank on me? If that's the case, why are you asking me that question?" It was no wonder that Azardus was so enraged. If it were anyone else, they would definitely feel horrible to be given hope while in a state of despair and hopelessness, only to have their hopes dashed again a moment later. Besides, Azardus had blamed his tragic state on Lin Li to a certain extent, so he naturally wouldn't think of him as a nice person. However, Lin Li wasn't annoyed. He simply glanced at his artist calmly, and after the latter's emotions stabilized a little, he smilingly said, "It's true that I can't take you away just like that, but there's another method, though it will require a compromise. Are you willing to accept it?" Azardus had initially already calmed down, but Lin Li made him get worked up again. However, he didn't curse loudly anymore, and instead sneered, "A method that requires me to compromise. Tell me then, what method can I use to get out of here?" "Actually, this method is very simple," Lin Li said while taking out a hideous-looking stone from the Ring of Endless Storm, which was Azardus' dragon crystal. Immediately afterwards, he said, "I can let you enter this dragon crystal so that your form of existence will change. That would be tantamount to disappearing from the seal, and so you would naturally be able to break free from the restraint of this seal." Although Azardus wanted to leave this place very much, it didn't mean that he would lose his ability to think straight. After hearing the solution that Lin Li proposed, he did not immediately agree to it, but instead sized Lin Li up from head to toe for a while before cautiously saying, "Since it requires a compromise, I'm afraid I have to bear a lot of consequences, right?" Lin Li didn't intend to hide it from him, and nodded honestly. He said, "Nothing in this world is perfect. Since it's an approach that requires some tricks, it will naturally come with some flaws. The flaw of this method is that after you enter this dragon crystal, you will never be able to leave again. In other words, I'll still be sealed, but just in a different place from here, right?" Azardus asked with a tone of derision, seemingly mocking Lin Li and also mocking himself self-deprecatingly for being in such a predicament. "You can say that, so, you can make your choice now. Do you want to continue being sealed here, or move to another place? To say the least, you can still look at the outside world, if you're sealed in the magical crystal," Lin Li said as he weighed the dragon crystal in his hand. "Ha ha." Azardus laughed, seemingly resigned to his fate. He said to Lin Li, "Okay, as long as I can get out of here, I'll do your bidding. What do I have to do?" Hence, Lin Li told Azardus to give up on resisting, and then chanted a demonic rune under his breath, and it was the very same one that he used when subduing the Lord of Darkness with the dragon crystal. Given the level of Azardus' strength, the demonic rune would not work as long as he had a wisp of conscious resistance. However, he indeed wavered due to Lin Li's words. A few moments later, Azardus turned into a mass of light and flew into the dragon crystal in Lin Li's hand. Immediately afterwards, the dragon crystal, which was initially extremely hideous, changed drastically. It seemed to have turned into a dazzling pearl that was shining brightly under several brilliant rays of light. As Azardus' aura and breath vanished from the altar, the surrounding seal also changed immediately. The mana that was initially calm seemed to have become extremely menacing and explosive like a storm in the ocean. The entire cave also began to shake violently, while large chunks of stone landed everywhere. Lin Li didn't dare to procrastinate or slow down at all as he frantically retreated from the altar before slashing open a spatial rift in the air and stepping into it. Almost simultaneously with Lin Li's departure, the cave already started collapsing violently, and everything around the altar and the seal was buried in the depths of the earth in the blink of an eye. When Lin Li came out of the spatial rift, he was already in the sky above the square. At this moment, the abyss seemed to have turned into a massive vortex that pulled in everything in the square. Fortunately, there was no longer anyone else in the square at this moment. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't escape the fate of being buried in the cave. After more than an hour, the vibrations in the ground finally stopped, and the Gilded Kingdom's upper square had almost vanished too. The lazurite the ground was paved with had also been sucked into the cavern, turning into a filler for it. The entire square turned into a small basin, while the center, which wasn't filled, turned into a large, deep pit. Immediately afterwards, the people of the Gilded Kingdom, who noticed the strange situation, as well as the representatives of the various forces, rushed over. However, when they arrived, Lin Li had already left the square and returned to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk. Thus, all that they saw was the wreckage and ruins of the square, but none of them knew what had actually happened here. Lin Li's team returned to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk, and Connorus, who was originally guarding the mouth of the cave, finally found the chance to ask Lin Li about what happened in the abyss. However, since the matter involved the secret of his transmigration, Lin Li merely gave Connorus a brief account of what happened while withholding some information. He then asked Connorus, "You said that you can already replace Mozari, so will those demons of the Endless Abyss and the Demon Lords become an obstacle for you in taking charge of the Endless Abyss?" Now that Connorus had fused Mozari's heart of demon with his body, it was akin to becoming the successor of Mozari. However, his current strength had yet to reach the divine realm, and there were countless powerful demon lords in the Endless Abyss. Hence, it was still unknown if they would willingly concede to him, and accept him to be their master. An extremely bold concept had already surfaced in Lin Li's mind because he was no longer satisfied with the current small-scale transformation of the Sky Castle. The abundant resources in the endless abyss were the foundation necessary for his bold idea. Hence, whether or not Connors could gain full control of the endless abyss was very important to him. After hearing Lin Li's question, Connors smiled confidently as he said, "Don't worry, Fulik, I've already obtained the method to control the endless abyss from the heart of demon. As long as those demons are within the abyss, they will be subject to the abyssal force regardless of how strong they are. Hence, subduing them is not a problem at all." Alright then. Lin Li was thrilled to hear his answer, and he immediately gleefully said, "Return to the abyss immediately and mobilize all the resources in the endless abyss. I need a huge amount of resources and materials for the transformation of the Sky Castle." Although Connors was now the master of the endless abyss, and everything in the abyss could be considered his belongings, Connors wasn't stingy after hearing Lin Li's request. On the one hand, he was still bound by the soul contract with Lin Li, and on the other hand, he didn't feel the pinch, because he had gained all of this effortlessly. Besides, to Connors, the value of those resources in the endless abyss was far smaller than that of his relationship with Lin Li. Even if Lin Li wanted the entire endless abyss, Connors wouldn't say no, let alone regarding the resources in the abyss. Connors would never be blinded by interests and benefits. Even till now, he still couldn't tell where the limit of Lin Li's growth was. Lin Li might very well be a figure like the immortal king or Garesco. Even a fool would be able to tell that staying by Lin Li's side would surely bring about great benefits. Hence, after hearing Lin Li's words, Connors immediately agreed with a nod, and even quickly chanted a few demonic curses and incantations. A small abyssal door was then opened in the embassy. Since Lin Li said to do it immediately, Connors naturally didn't dare to delay at all. After informing Lin Li, he stepped straight into the abyssal door to receive everything that the great demon deity Mozari had left behind. After Connors returned to the endless abyss, Lin Li, too, didn't intend to stay in the Gilded Kingdom any longer. To a certain extent, he had already gotten some answers to the doubts in his mind, and the Gilded Kingdom's founding celebration was considered to be over too. Hence, there was no point in staying here any longer. However, Lin Li still had one more thing to do before he could get ready to leave, and that was to complete his purchase of the magical crystal cannons from the Gilded Kingdom. In fact, one of the most important things on Lin Li's agenda on the trip to the Gilded Kingdom was to track down the traces of the Immortal King. Another was to purchase the magical crystal cannons from the Immortal King. Although the Gilded Kingdom's magical crystal cannons didn't require much technique to make, he at least didn't need to waste much time on it. The Gilded Kingdom's founding celebration had already been held, and regardless of whether it had been drawn to a close successfully, the Gilded Kingdom definitely wasn't interested in doing it again. Hence, the only thing left for Lin Li to do now was to purchase the magical crystal cannons. On the following day, almost all the important ministers from the Gilded Kingdom arrived at the embassy of the Tower of Dusk, under King Bradler's lead to thank Lin Li for his help in Hupper Square. Of course, the authorities of the Gilded Kingdom weren't just going to thank Lin Li verbally. The kindness of saving the entire kingdom during the crisis wasn't something that could be repaid easily. In order to thank Lin Li for his help, the Gilded Kingdom also expressed their gratitude with utmost sincerity, as they sent to Lin Li loads of thank you gifts, which required more than half a day to transport to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk. Although the Gilded Kingdom had sent a large quantity of gifts, the quality of the gifts wasn't compromised. There were valuable items such as top-grade fist-sized magical gemstones, ocean crystals that contained pure nomological power, magical metals produced specially in the ocean, and so on. There were also 10 pieces of magical equipment, which were said to be treasures from the royal treasure vault of the Gilded Kingdom. They consisted of 4 magic staffs, 3 sets of mage robes, a magic sword, and 2 magic beads. In Anral, these 10 pieces of magical equipment would definitely be considered top-grade items, even if they couldn't compare to epic-level magical equipment like the Helios Scepter. However, these items didn't appeal much to Lin Li. Be it the 7 pieces of the debris of the stars, the Helios Scepter, or the space robe, all the items that Lin Li carried with him were far better than what these pieces of magical equipment could compare to. Even though the items that the mages of the Tower of Dusk were equipped with did not have much fame, the power they possessed might not be worse when compared to these items. Of course, since the Gilded Kingdom had already sent those gifts to him, Lin Li wouldn't pretend to be aloof and turn them down. Even if he couldn't use them, he could just give them away. Even if the mages of the Tower of Dusk didn't need these items, he could give it away to others as favors. In short, even a stone would eventually have its value. After an exchange of pleasantries, Lin Li mentioned the matter of the purchase of the magical crystal cannons, but the Gilded Kingdom no longer made any difficulties. They all knew very well that with Lin Li's strength, it wouldn't matter if Lin Li had any magical crystal cannons, or not if he were to wage a war against the Gilded Kingdom, because he could easily destroy the Gilded Kingdom just by drawing a few maggots. Since the issue of providing resources for a potential enemy no longer existed, and coupled with their desire to get into the good graces of Lin Li, a guru of inscription, Bradler and others naturally chose not to make things difficult for Lin Li regarding this issue. President Flick, please feel free to let us know. Even if we don't have enough in stock, we'll definitely come up with a solution that will be up to your satisfaction, even if we have to dismantle the ones that are equipped on the battleships. Bradler waved his hand and made a promise to Lin Li. Of course, they were just exaggerating by saying that they would remove the magical crystal cannons that were currently equipped on their battleships. After all, there were already thousands of magical crystal cannons in the Gilded Kingdom's inventory. In Bradler's opinion, Lin Li wouldn't be able to empty their inventory of magical crystal cannons in any case, because the transportation alone was already a boggling issue. None of the several important ministers of the Gilded Kingdom felt that there was anything wrong with Bradler's statement. While they wouldn't deliberately make things difficult for Lin Li, there were some who wanted to see Lin Li make a fool out of himself, such as the ministers who were initially in support of the idea of going to war with Lin Li. They knew very well how difficult it was to transport a magical crystal cannon, especially to the breezy plains, which was thousands of kilometers away. It was definitely a tedious process that was similar to an ant moving an elephant. Lin Li was indeed a guru of inscription, but there had never been a guru of inscription who could move away a few hundreds, or even thousands of magical crystal cannons just with a simple maggoth. Lin Li naturally saw all their expressions, but he couldn't be bothered to confront them. He then said to Bradler, "Your Majesty, I've been here for quite some time now, and there are still quite a few things that I have to do at the Tower of Dusk. So, since you have no objections, I think we should arrange a date and time to complete our deal as soon as possible." "All right, President Flick." Hearing Lin Li's intention to leave, Bradler did not say any more words to make Lin Li stay, as he knew that such words didn't mean much to Lin Li. He then said, "Tomorrow it shall be. I will arrange for someone to accompany you to view the goods tomorrow. Do you really not need our help with transportation?" Bradler really wanted to build a good relationship with Lin Li, so he didn't have the intention of watching Lin Li make a fool out of himself. Instead, he once again offered to help Lin Li with the transportation of the magical crystal cannons. However, Lin Li waved his hand and nonchalantly said, "As I said before, we can solve the transportation issues ourselves. We won't trouble you." Hearing that Lin Li still insisted on transporting the magical crystal cannons by himself, Bradler didn't say anything else, even though he was baffled. Hence, after settling on a time with Lin Li, he left the embassy with the ministers. Bright and early in the following morning, Prince ManhwaRecap of the Gilded Kingdom and Elder Zoomer of the Illuminati once again came to the embassy of the Tower of Dusk to bring Lin Li over to collect the magical crystal cannons as agreed upon earlier. Prince ManhwaRecap was naturally there to complete the deal with Lin Li on behalf of the Gilded Kingdom. The reason that Elder Zoomer tagged along was to show how much the Illuminati valued Lin Li by helping him keep an eye on the Gilded Kingdom, lest the latter created any problems for him. Under the lead of Prince ManhwaRecap and Elder Zoomer, Lin Li first arrived in a small satellite city outside the capital of the Gilded Kingdom, which could be considered an industrial city that specialized in the production of magical crystal cannons. After observing the production line and manufacturing process of the magical crystal cannons, Lin Li followed ManhwaRecap and Zoomer to a guarded warehouse. The warehouse occupied a large area, but there were only less than 20 magical crystal cannons in it. It wasn't that the Gilded Kingdom was being overly cautious, but rather that the magical crystal cannons were really just massive. They had already taken up the space of the entire warehouse even though there were less than 20. In order to avoid any misunderstanding, Prince ManhwaRecap explained, "Don't worry, President Flick, this is only one of the storage warehouses. There are 6 more of such warehouses in this city, with a total of more than 100 completed magical crystal cannons." Deep down, Prince ManhwaRecap felt that the Tower of Dusk would face some difficulties with transporting these 100-odd magical crystal cannons without the Gilded Kingdom's help. He reckoned that this stock was the limit of Lin Li's transportation abilities, and was even prepared to offer to help Lin Li with the transport again. Elder Zoomer knew that many of the Gilded Kingdom's citizens were bent on watching Lin Li embarrass himself. Hence, before Lin Li could show the slightest dismay of being put on the spot, Elder Zoomer immediately seized the opportunity to say, "President Flick, the Illuminati has its own fleet of cargo ships, too, so you don't have to worry too much about the transportation issues." However, Lin Li shook his head slightly and slowly walked past between the various magical crystal cannons. As Lin Li passed by, something that seemed unbelievable even to ManhwaRecap and Zoomer happened. The massive magical crystal cannons actually quietly vanished from the warehouse. ManhwaRecap rubbed his eyes hard, but when he raised his head again, he saw that the entire warehouse had almost been emptied. The magical crystal cannons had disappeared in the blink of an eye, and there was nothing in the warehouse except for some miscellaneous items that were piled up in the corner. Elder Zoomer's jaw dropped, and he looked at Lin Li, who was standing across from him in the warehouse. His eyes were full of horror, and he was too shocked for words, if he had just seen a ghost. Where did those magical crystal cannons go? As far as ManhwaRecap and Zoomer knew, the sudden disappearance of those cannons had to have something to do with space magical equipment. However, the problem was that even the most famous space magical equipment in the world that was said to be close to the level of a space artifact couldn't have such a horrifyingly vast amount of space. In ManhwaRecap's and Zoomer's memory, the best space magical equipment that they had seen contained at most more than 10 cubic meters of space, which was simply insufficient for holding even the base of a magical crystal cannon, let alone 20 complete magical crystal cannons. At this moment, ManhwaRecap and Zoomer finally understood why Lin Li repeatedly turned down their kind offers to help with the transport. The transportation of 20 magical crystal cannons would require at least 10 of the largest cargo ships, and they would even have to bear certain risks in the ocean. However, if the cannons were loaded into space magical equipment, there wouldn't be a need for any cargo ships, as Lin Li could just open a rift in space to bring the magical crystal cannons back to the Tower of Dusk. However, just when ManhwaRecap and Zoomer were astounded by Lin Li's space magical equipment, Lin Li walked towards them and said, "Okay, it's done. Didn't you mention that there are a few more warehouses?" Hearing Lin Li's words, ManhwaRecap and Zoomer were completely dumbstruck and stupefied. Have those 20 magical crystal cannons not filled up the space of his magical equipment yet? However, Lin Li did not intend to bother about their mood. Since Bradler had already told him to take the magical crystal cannons as he pleased, what else did he have to worry about? Lin Li wasn't trying to make things hard for the Gilded Kingdom, but rather it was that no number of magical crystal cannons would be considered enough for the Sky Castle. If there were 10,000 magical crystal cannons, it would allow the Sky Castle to truly be invincible. Unfortunately, even the Gilded Kingdom couldn't have 10,000 magical crystal cannons, even if they removed all the magical crystal cannons on the current battleships. Besides, Lin Li didn't plan to drive them to such an extreme, as it would be too much to make the Gilded Kingdom dismantle the cannons on the battleships. Thus, under the leadership of ManhwaRecap and Zoomer, Lin Li arrived at the other warehouses that were used to store magical crystal cannons. Once again, he emptied them out one after another. After Lin Li had emptied 6 warehouses in the city, ManhwaRecap knew that the 100 or so magical crystal cannons were obviously unable to meet Lin Li's needs. So, he had no choice but to take him to the arsenals of the various large fleets of the kingdom. In half a day's time, Lin Li almost took an entire tour around Four Seasons Island, and stowed away the magical crystal cannons in the inventory of several major fleets in the Ring of Endless Storm. Towards the end, Zoomer and ManhwaRecap were both used to it, and they completely couldn't imagine how much space there was in Lin Li's magical equipment. Finally, after putting together more than 2,000 magical crystal cannons, Lin Li looked at Prince ManhwaRecap, who was almost on the verge of tears. He said with a hidden meaning, "Okay, I'll buy these for now, and make do. They're barely enough. Thank God, it's finally over." ManhwaRecap was really afraid that Lin Li would be displeased and start a war with them. If Lin Li were to say so, it would definitely be a huge headache for the Gilded Kingdom. After putting the goods away, Lin Li now had to discuss the price with ManhwaRecap. Initially, the Gilded Kingdom had planned to give the magical crystal cannons to Lin Li as a favor if he only wanted 4 or 5 of them, but since he had taken way more than 2,000, the Gilded Kingdom couldn't afford to give such a hefty gift regardless of how magnanimous and generous they might be. Even with his status and identity, Prince ManhwaRecap didn't dare to decide presumptuously in a matter that involved more than 2,000 magical crystal cannons. Upon the group's return to the Tower of Dusk's embassy, he immediately bade farewell to Lin Li, and proceeded to ask for Bradler's and the other ministers' opinion. In the palace of the Gilded Kingdom, King Bradler and a few important ministers were discussing the matter of Lin Li's purchase of the magical crystal cannons. They knew that ManhwaRecap had brought Lin Li to look at the goods today, and although it wasn't appropriate for them to say anything in front of Lin Li yesterday, they couldn't help but discuss it now. In particular, although the several war-supporting ministers didn't dare to mention waging a war at every turn, they absolutely disliked Lin Li. During the founding celebration, Lin Li had saved the Gilded Kingdom, but some of the ministers felt that it seemed unnecessary to be grateful to Lin Li. The people of the Gilded Kingdom were all aware that Lin Li definitely needed more than just 1 or 2 magical crystal cannons because the Tower of Dusk had been trying to buy magical crystal cannons from the Gilded Kingdom since a long time ago, but the latter had been delaying the deal using various excuses. However, if they bought many magical crystal cannons, transportation would undoubtedly be a huge problem. When the ministers headed to the Tower of Dusk with King Bradler to thank and express their gratitude to Lin Li, they had clearly heard Lin Li rejecting Bradler's offer to help with the transportation. If the Tower of Dusk had enough transportation capabilities, they wouldn't find it that peculiar. But the issue was that even till now, they still hadn't heard of the Tower of Dusk recruiting ships for transport. Let's just wait and see. President Flick is just too prideful. I'm afraid he'll inevitably ask for our help in the end, said a minister, who was acting like he had seen through it all. Bradler couldn't help but frown after hearing those words as he was displeased with the minister's tone. He said in a deep voice, "If he needs help, we'll lend him a hand." What's the point of saying this now? I didn't gather all of you here to hear you discuss these matters, but rather I want to discuss the future strategy for expanding into the breezy plains. The Gilded Kingdom indeed had to change their strategy in expanding to the breezy plains. Putting aside the fact that the war supporters had wanted to forcefully encroach on the breezy plains, the peace supporters had also treated the Tower of Dusk condescendingly as if they had been doing the breezy plains a favor by being kind enough to take a peaceful approach. However, the war-supporting faction naturally didn't dare to mention forceful encroachment now, while the peace supporters also had to change their original mentality. Otherwise, if they were to use the same attitude as before, and try to establish a cooperative relationship with the breezy plains, they would probably be put to shame again. While the members of the Gilded Kingdom were discussing this issue, a guard of the royal palace scurried in from outside and reported to King Bradler that Monterey had returned. "Oh, he's back. Hurry up and ask him to come in." Bradler hurriedly asked the palace guard to call Monterey in, eager to find out from Monterey how they had handled things. Soon, Monterey entered. Although he didn't forget to salute Bradler, the anxious look on his face immediately caught Evrion's attention. Bradler's heart sank a little. Before even asking Monterey to take a seat, he eagerly asked, "What's the matter, Monterey? Did things go awry?" The several important ministers also seemed to be curious as to why Monterey, who had always been composed and reliable, would behave in such an anxious manner. In particular, the ministers who were in charge of the manufacture of magical crystal cannons immediately panicked, fearing that their subordinates had acted ignorantly and caused some trouble at this point. Looking at Bradler with a bitter smile on his face, Prince Monterey said, "Your Majesty, President Flick's selection of the magical crystal cannons went rather well. I came back to ask you how far we are going to go with this deal. How much are we going to charge President Flick for the magical crystal cannons?" Upon hearing Prince Monterey's words, Bradler was instantly displeased. In fact, he even blamed Monterey for his lack of conscientiousness. He frowned and said, "Didn't I already mention before that we'll give the magical crystal cannons to him for free as a favor? He won't buy many anyway." Although the cost of manufacturing the magical crystal cannons was rather high, the Gilded Kingdom had enough financial power to give 20-30 magical crystal cannons to Lin Li for free. Besides, Lin Li didn't need help with the transportation either. Thus, it made Bradler assume that Lin Li would purchase at most 20-30 magical crystal cannons. However, after hearing Bradler's words, the bitter smile on Monterey's face intensified, and he said, "But Your Majesty, President Flick wants a large amount of magical crystal cannons. I'm afraid we can't afford to really give all of them to him for free. That's why I came back to ask for your opinion and an appropriate price to charge." "TSK, Prince Monterey, you're exaggerating things. How many magical crystal cannons can President Flick possibly want?" 20-30 magical crystal cannons would already require a large transport capacity. Or is it that President Flick has changed his mind and wants our help with transporting them? The right-wing minister Burgess asked disdainfully. Burgess was the leader of the war-supporting faction in the first place, and he had hoped to gain more power by waging a war against the breezy plains. However, his plan had already fallen through, but even though they were no longer going to go to war with the breezy plains, he was still as repulsed by Lin Li as ever. However, Burgess was smart enough to know that he couldn't take things too far and go overboard at this juncture. All he could do was mock Lin Li a few times to express his displeasure. Bradler didn't bother paying attention to the tone of voice of Burgess and the others either. He disdainfully said, "Monterey, haven't I already given you full authority to handle this matter? As long as it's within our capacity, we should fulfill President Flick's requests to the greatest extent. Improving our relationship with him is the most important thing to do now. So what if we have to fork out some money? Tell me just how many magical crystal cannons he needs." Bradler's current concern was not how much they would have to pay, but rather that Lin Li might be offended by and displeased with Monterey's decision to head back to the palace to ask for Bradler's opinion. After all, They had already given Lin Li their promise previously, and they would seem like they were going back on their word if they were to discuss the price among themselves again. Faced with Bradler's questioning, which vaguely sounded like a rebuke, ManhwaRecap clearly felt somewhat aggrieved. Instead of telling the truth directly, he held out 2 fingers and said, "Your Majesty, President Fulik wants this number of magical crystal cannons. I really am in no place to decide." 200. Bradler stayed silent for a moment. This number had indeed exceeded his expectations, and he would definitely feel the pinch when giving away 200 magical crystal cannons as a favor. On the other hand, the ministers of the Gilded Kingdom had a slight change in expression, because if the value of 200 magical crystal cannons was measured in gold coins, it would probably amount to as much as a few years' worth of the kingdom's tax revenue. Hence, the ministers immediately expressed their dissatisfaction and said, "You must be kidding, 200 magical crystal cannons. President Fulik has got such a huge appetite. Besides, how is he going to transport 200 magical crystal cannons back to the breezy plains? I'm afraid we'll have to end up helping him with the transportation in the end." Bradler couldn't help but hesitate. After all, it would really break the bank to do Lin Li this favor, but since they wanted to do him a favor, they had to fulfill it to the very end. If they were to take into account the cost, price and profits, it wouldn't be considered a favor. However, considering the importance of establishing a good relationship with a guru of inscription, Bradler decided to fulfill it after weighing the pros and cons for a while. Even though he would really feel the pinch, he said to ManhwaRecap, "Okay, go back and tell President Fulik that we'll give him 200 magical crystal cannons as a gift for his help in killing that demon. On top of that, we can also help him transport the magical crystal cannons back to the breezy plains, should he face any difficulties in doing so." While speaking, Bradler felt extremely anguished, as if his heart was bleeding. He was about to let someone else rip him off, and was even going to help them deliver the goods. He really seemed to be holding himself cheap. However, just after Bradler finished his sentence, and the ministers of the Gilded Kingdom were about to persuade him, Prince ManhwaRecap looked at Bradler and shook his head helplessly. He said, "Your Majesty, I'm very sorry, but President Fulik wants 2,000 magical crystal cannons, not 200. 2,000 magical crystal cannons." The spacious palace was filled with the sounds of the crowd inhaling sharply. Bradler felt his vision turning black, and he almost fell off the throne, but he managed to regain his balance after a while. He eagerly confirmed with ManhwaRecap, "What did you say? Repeat yourself. How many magical crystal cannons does President Fulik want?" The ministers had their eyes glued onto Prince ManhwaRecap with looks of disbelief on their faces. Indeed, 2,000 magical crystal cannons was different from 2,000 spears because it was all the stock they had in their inventory, which they had accumulated for numerous years. If they gave away all of them in one go, it would be akin to incapacitating the Gilded Kingdom. It wouldn't just break their bank, it would be emptying it completely. On the other hand, ManhwaRecap knew that he had to stop after taking some revenge. Hence, he said, "Yes, Your Majesty, President Fulik wants to purchase 2,000 magical crystal cannons. This morning, we've already been to all the warehouses where the magical crystal cannons are stored, but we only managed to put together 2,000. That's why I came back to ask you how much we're going to charge him." "Impossible, 2,000 magical crystal cannons. How are they supposed to transport it back to the breezy plains? He must be kidding." Burgess and the other ministers were all in disbelief after coming to a realization. 200 magical crystal cannons already required a rather large fleet of ships to transport, and the transportation capacity required for 2,000 magical crystal cannons was even beyond the limit of the Gilded Kingdom. Thus, they couldn't wrap their heads around how the Tower of Dusk could possibly transport them. The doubts of the several ministers gave Bradler a glimmer of hope. He looked at ManhwaRecap and said, "ManhwaRecap, are you sure that President Fulik is not joking? I know that those 2 incidents in the past have caused him to have a bad impression of us, so it's understandable that he might pull a prank on us, but you should be able to tell if he was being serious or not." Seeing the crowd's ignorance, ManhwaRecap sighed and said, "Transporting 2,000 magical crystal cannons is not an issue for President Fulik at all. He has a piece of space magical equipment that is comparable to an artifact. He can easily fit all 2,000 magical crystal cannons in it, so I'm very clear that he isn't joking." Although what ManhwaRecap said was the truth, Bradler and the others found it even harder to accept than the news just now. They simply couldn't imagine what kind of magical equipment would allow one to easily store 2,000 magical crystal cannons. Even in myths and legends, there probably wasn't such an incredible item. Bradler and the others knew that ManhwaRecap clearly wouldn't lie about this, so they had no choice but to believe that Lin Li really owned such an artifact. Now, the issue was that Lin Li wanted 2,000 magical crystal cannons. Regardless of how generous Bradler might be, he wouldn't give them to Lin Li for free. Even if they were to charge him at the cost price, it would be a huge loss for the Gilded Kingdom. In the Gilded Kingdom, magical crystal cannons were not ordinary commercial products, but reserve resources for war. In addition to the cost of manufacturing, they held greater significance too. For example, the kingdom had to rebuild the fifth fleet that Lin Li had destroyed, and if they didn't have any magical crystal cannons left for their battleships, their ships wouldn't be considered battleships anymore. Hence, even if they sold the 2,000 magical crystal cannons to Lin Li at a high price, it would have quite a great impact on the Gilded Kingdom. Besides, this impact couldn't be negated easily, and they had no choice but to slowly accumulate more reserves again in order to gradually eliminate the impact of this loss. However, the issue now was that Lin Li had already stowed all the 2,000-something magical crystal cannons in the Ring of Endless Storm, and ManhwaRecap had merely returned to ask about the price of the magical crystal cannons. It could be said that it was too late for the Gilded Kingdom to go back on their word. This is too much. What exactly is that Philip trying to do? Have we not given him enough compensation? Burgess and the several ministers, who used to be the main war supporters, were instantly displeased with Lin Li's behavior. The only reason that they didn't ask to start a war was because they were still rather clear-minded now. In the past, they would have treated this as a good reason to start a war. Bradler waved his hand. Although he blamed ManhwaRecap, he knew that it wasn't the time to reprimand him now. Hence, he said to the ministers, "Okay, let's now discuss how much we're going to charge President Philip for the magical crystal cannons." By saying that, Bradler had already resigned to fate, and all they could do now was to consider how to reduce the kingdom's losses. However, to make up for the loss, he had to do more than just charge Lin Li a high price for the magical crystal cannons. After all, the Gilded Kingdom had intended to use this deal to get closer to Lin Li, but if they were to charge him a high price, it would be nothing more than a business transaction that had nothing to do with friendship. Regardless of what choice they made, it would be very difficult for the Gilded Kingdom. Hence, the ministers of the Gilded Kingdom had another heated discussion about how much money they should charge Lin Li. While the discussion was still ongoing because they had yet to reach a consensus, the royal guards outside the palace came to report that the envoy of the Tower of Dusk had come forth to see Bradler. The person from the Tower of Dusk was the deputy head of the Tower of Dusk's Mage Legion, Doric. At the same time, he also brought an amethyst card that was meant for transactions. Lin Li had long thought that the Gilded Kingdom would definitely fret over the price of the magical crystal cannons. Hence, he didn't wait for Prince ManhwaRecap to return, and simply sent the amethyst card over. Lin Li wasn't short of money. The Mount Tai Magath scroll was sold for more than 400 million gold coins, and the Tower of Dusk had plenty of gold coins to spare too. Thus, buying more than 2,000 magical crystal cannons was not a problem at all. Therefore, he didn't bother waiting for the Gilded Kingdom to reach a consensus, because God knew how long that would take. Lin Li's approach was to give the Gilded Kingdom a tough problem to solve. Of course, he was forcing them to come to a decision. Since he had already brought the money over, there was nothing else for them to discuss except for the price anymore. Doric had also told Bradler and the others what Lin Li's intentions were, and that was to just let them charge him the price that they should without considering the cost price or any other factors. After some hypocritical refusal, Bradler accepted the amethyst card that Doric had brought over. The price that they had charged for the magical crystal cannons was also slightly higher than before. Of course, to the Gilded Kingdom, even if they had charged a higher price, there were still some losses that couldn't be made up for, though it was still much better than selling at the cost price. After Lin Li completed the deal with the Gilded Kingdom, he turned up to bid Bradler goodbye. Although Bradler had yet to recover from the shock, he nevertheless held a grand farewell ceremony for Lin Li. Besides, the farewell ceremony was clearly different from the previous welcome ceremony, as almost everyone was genuinely elated to finally be sending the fiendish Lin Li away. During the time Lin Li was in the Gilded Kingdom, Lin Li had first put the Gilded Kingdom to shame twice, which made them learn their lesson and discipline their juniors sternly. Thus, those juniors had had a hard time facing the music. Now that Lin Li was finally leaving, they no longer had to live fearfully on tenterhooks. How could they not be elated? On the other hand, Lin Li had had a fruitful trip. Not only did he get plenty of answers about the immortal king, his strength and attainment in inscription had also increased greatly. At the same time, he also got to purchase more than 2,000 magical crystal cannons from the Gilded Kingdom. To him, there was no longer anything in the Gilded Kingdom that was worth staying for. With a loud and long roar, the large ship, the Star, slowly sailed out of Helena port and gradually disappeared on the horizon where the sea and sky met while Bradler and the others watched them leave. Bradler finally let out a long sigh. At the same time, many ministers behind him made the same sound in unison. After Lin Li left, all the members of the Gilded Kingdom heaved a sigh of relief because they finally didn't have to worry about accidentally provoking Lin Li. Lin Li and the members of the Tower of Dusk were not the only ones on the star, as the representatives of the forces of the breezy plains all returned together with Lin Li. At this moment, they were all grinning widely and marveling at the generosity and hospitality of the Gilded Kingdom while looking at Four Seasons Island that was disappearing out of sight. Due to Lin Li's relationship with the Gilded Kingdom, they had also negotiated with the Gilded Kingdom and reached plenty of business cooperation agreements, which allowed them to make a huge profit. The star was sailing fast along the route towards the breezy plains, but just after it left the waters of the Gilded Kingdom, it suddenly changed its course and sailed in a different direction on Lin Li's orders. The people of the breezy plains were initially rather puzzled, but no one asked Lin Li for the reason. They thought about how the star had deviated from its course during their journey to Four Seasons Island, and they'd ended up harvesting a large amount of precious treasures and ocean specialties thanks to that. Hence, they wondered if it would have the same outcome again this time. However, soon the people on board the star knew the reason for Lin Li's actions. Just after the star changed course and sailed for less than half an hour, an island appeared in front of it. The crowd couldn't get a clear glimpse of what there was on the island, but they saw the army of a sea clan surrounding the island. The sea clan army that surrounded the island had also discovered the star at this point and immediately moved towards it. Seeing how aggressive the army was, a few representatives of the forces of the breezy plains stood out in a bid to explain to the army on behalf of Lin Li lest they got into a conflict due to a misunderstanding. They had all lowered themselves and put themselves in the right place now. Especially after their experiences in the Gilded Kingdom, they had become even more determined to take Lin Li and the Tower of Dusk as their superior. Hence, at this moment, the representatives of the forces of the breezy plains no longer considered themselves as guests of the star, and instead willingly acted as Lin Li's subordinates. Hence, as subordinates, it was naturally their job to communicate with the Sea Clan's army, and Lin Li didn't have to intervene at all. However, before Claus and the others said anything, Lin Li, who was standing on the deck, reached out, pointed his finger forward, and swung it in the air, opening a rift between the sea and the sky. It was just like the giant mouth of a ferocious beast. Immediately afterwards, the Sea Clan army that was moving towards the star couldn't help but move into the rift before vanishing in the darkness within. Seeing this scene, Claus and the others were dumbstruck as they wondered what was wrong with Lin Li and why he had struck before the Sea Clan even responded. What if it was just something that could be explained verbally, they thought. Although they had long known that Lin Li had always refused to suffer any losses, the other party had yet to do anything offensive, after all. However, after exterminating the army of the Sea Clan that had welcomed them, and as the star gradually approached the island, the scene on that island became clearer and clearer to the crowd. That allowed Claus and the others to finally understand why the star suddenly changed course, and the reason for Lin Li's mercilessness. The area of the island wasn't that large, and was probably only about a few square kilometers. There were bulging hills and sparse trees. In the center of the island, there were 100 or so smaller and vulnerable Sea Clan members, each with a conch hung in front of their chests. They were the Bellerophon clan, who had bought the coral staff at the auction previously. The Bellerophon clan members all seemed chagrined and furious as they looked at the army surrounding the island with some faint despair in their eyes. There was a sanguine cloud floating in the air, with the vampire Norfaller standing in the middle, his bat wings open and covered with dark golden patterns. Since he was more interested in the abilities of the Bellerophon clan, Lin Li told Norfaller to secretly keep an eye on the people of the Bellerophon clan after the auction was over. If nothing happened, Lin Li would soon send someone to make a formal contact with the Bellerophon clan before negotiating a business cooperation. However, the Bellerophon clan had clearly gotten into trouble this time, so Norfaller had no choice but to walk out lest he allowed the Bellerophons, which Lin Li was interested in, to be killed. However, Norfaller was a sanctuary-level vampire and a top assassin of Anril at the moment, and what an assassin was best at was assassination, not protection. If Norfaller was alone, he would still be able to come and go as he pleased even if there were 10 times more military units against him. In fact, it wouldn't be impossible to destroy all the enemies. However, Norfaller wasn't alone now, and he had even brought along a bunch of Bellerophons who didn't have any combat power. Although they would be a good military force, they didn't have any direct lethal power. Thus, it wouldn't be easy for Norfaller to protect them. Besides, the Sea Clan army that surrounded the island was the Sea Serpent clan that had failed to bid for the coral staff. The Sea Serpent clan could be considered the natural assassins of the Sea Clans. Purely in terms of their talent in assassinating, they might not be comparable to vampires, but they definitely wouldn't be far off. Although such a characteristic had caused the Sea Serpent clan's army to suffer some losses in a face-on battle, and they could only be considered the lowest among the ranks of the 7 overlords. The fact that they could become one of the 7 overlords meant that they had considerable competency. The scene that Norfaller was now facing was equivalent to facing the siege of tens of thousands of assassins, and he even had to take care of the Bellerophons who had no fighting ability. The Bellerophons not only couldn't provide any help to Norfaller, they even limited his abilities and performance to a certain extent. After the star set off, Lin Li found out about Norfaller's situation through soul contact. Thus, he immediately made the ship change direction. Now that he knew the reason for this matter, Lin Li naturally did not bother to talk much to the Sea Serpent clan, and thus he exterminated a team of sea serpents as soon as he struck. With the extermination of the Sea Serpent clansmen, the Sea Serpent clan generals, who were in command of this operation, immediately knew that they were in big trouble. The Sea Serpent clan's elite actually wasn't there to snatch the coral staff from the Bellerophons. After all, the coral staff, which contained the secret of life, was too important for species like them with short lives. However, due to the fact that they didn't know of Norfaller's existence, none of the people they sent had returned. They had really suffered a double loss. That was why the Sea Serpent clan deployed the elites of their clan this time, with 2 sanctuary-level elders to watch over them. They were confident and ambitious to get the coral staff. The situation seemed rather successful at first, and even though the Sea Serpent clan couldn't do anything to the sanctuary-level vampire, Norfaller, things were obviously developing in the direction that was favorable to them. However, Lin Li, the star, suddenly appeared at this juncture. However, the coral staff was too important to the Sea Serpent clan, and even though they had heard all the legends about Lin Li, they couldn't bring themselves to give it up. Hence, after they got the news, they first sent a team to block the star in hopes of buying some time. However, the 2 elders of the Sea Serpent clan did not expect that Lin Li would destroy their team immediately without showing them any mercy. The 2 elders were instantly enraged, and they ordered their subordinates to intensify the siege on the island while closing in on the star. Which one of you is President Flick? I want an explanation. Caradio, one elder of the Sea Serpent clan, was holding a silver sword in his hand and standing on the waves while looking at the star, which was near him. The other elder, Yaros, vanished halfway through, as if he had merged into the water vapor above the sea. The 2 of them thought that since Lin Li, the president of the Tower of Dusk, was also merely a sanctuary powerhouse like them, they would be able to cooperate well and take down Lin Li. Although Lin Li's high attainment in the field of inscription was no secret in the Endless Ocean, the drawing of Manga still required a certain amount of time, as with casting magic spells and chanting incantations. Lin Li didn't display his competency in magic during his stay in the Gilded Kingdom, so no one knew about it. Assassins were good at launching surprise attacks, and wouldn't give their opponents any time to react. Thus, they could be considered the natural nemesis of mages. The 2 elders of the Sea Serpent clan could be considered sanctuary-level assassins, and they thought it should be effortless to deal with a sanctuary master with mediocre strength. However, when Elder Caradio was still thinking of ways to create opportunities for his peer, Lin Li had no intention of speaking to him at all. Instead, he raised the Helios scepter and swept it gently to the side. With Lin Li's effortless action, the star seemed to have solidified while hovering in midair. Immediately afterwards, the hidden Sea Serpent clan elder gradually appeared. If Lin Li had merely forced someone in stealth to reveal himself, it probably wouldn't have been considered an incredible feat, and Lin Li would at most have been considered to have senses that were sharp enough for him to see those who were concealed. However, the Sea Serpent clan elder who had been forced out was a sanctuary powerhouse, and yet he was frozen in midair and rendered immobile like an insect. Flick, do you want to go to war with the Sea Serpent clan? Elder Caradio was astounded and frightened to see that. While speaking, he waved the sword in his hand and prepared to go forward to rescue his companion. However, in response to Caradio's threat, Lin Li merely sneered without casting any magic spells. He merely flicked his hand in the direction of the Sea Serpent clan's sanctuary powerhouse, who was restrained. Immediately afterwards, the crisp sound of glass breaking could be heard in the space, which was suddenly divided into pieces. As the space shattered, the sanctuary powerhouse of the Sea Serpent clan shattered too.
Thank you for watching Mystic Realms Recap. Please like, share and subscribe. Have a great day.